Hello, everyone, and welcome to the National EV Charging Initiative's Energize Summit. I'm Colleen Quinn, co-administrator of the initiative and founder of eMobility Advisors. I will be acting as your virtual host and MC today. I want to start by acknowledging contributions made by many to support our effort. Gathered today at this virtual meeting are hundreds of individuals that represent the wide-ranging interests necessary to fuel this historic transition to transportation. Many of you are signatories to the National EV Charging Initiative, members of 35 national organizations that signed the MOU and have demonstrated the importance of collaboration and commitments necessary to achieve our shared goals. Others represent emerging market companies, utilities, automakers, EV charging companies that are already contributing to this market and want to see scale. We're also hosting government officials at every level, state and local, as well as environmental groups, labor organizations, members of the environmental justice community, and academia. All these actors are looking to achieve the important benefits of lower carbon emissions, job creation, and accessibility to all. Welcome, all of you. I also want to acknowledge the Natural Resources Defense Council for their leadership in the relentless pursuit of policies to support electric vehicle adoption. NRDC founded and funds the National EV Charging Initiative. And finally, I want to thank our small but mighty team. You'll hear later today from Dr. Nancy Ryan, partner of eMobility Advisors, and Max Baumhefner of NRDC. I also want to send a special shout out to Social Enterprises for planning and executing this event. So here's what to expect. Our format will be a fast-moving set of congressional-style hearings on the 4 policy pillars that make up the Energize agenda. We'll start with remarks from the Biden administration, providing an overview of the historic funding, legislation, and their important leadership role setting up this game-changing opportunity. We will then turn to the 4 pillars and hear from policy and legislative leaders that have authored legislation and have knowledge and experience with these issues. Spoiler alert, each pillar was featured in the slides that rolled up during setup, and there may be a test. We'll hear testimony from key stakeholders. From them, we want to understand how these actions will accelerate EV adoption, achieve their organization or company objectives, increase 10 times the investment in EV charging, install faster and cheaper. Unfortunately, we're not able to take questions live, but we received many questions from the audience, and we will use most of them during the Q&A portion of the panel. Here's why today is important. Today's Energize Summit will present the first national conversation around the Energize agenda, focused on accelerating EV charging with bold policies and action. We started the initiative in 2021 with the premise that we must come together and engage all relevant stakeholders. Work continued in 2022 with a focus on state NEVI funding plans. Now we're in the next phase of the effort. Energize, exclamation point. Note, this is not a passive word. We are making historic investments, but we know those alone are not sufficient. We need complementary private investments and state policies. The model policies we'll be discussing today are critical to make that happen. They will reduce upfront costs of installing charging infrastructure. They will target hard-to-reach segments of the market, improve the economics of operating charging stations, and remove barriers to the timely installation and energization of critical infrastructure. This event is meant to build consensus with model legislation that we will package up as greatest hits and take them on the road. So charge up your engines and let's get started. To kick off today's event, we're thrilled to have David Turk, Deputy Secretary at the Department of Energy. The Deputy Secretary is the second highest ranking official of the department and assists the Secretary in the supervision and direction of the department. David has served several roles in energy, including the International Energy Agency. During the Obama-Biden administration, David coordinated international technology and clean energy efforts at DOE. We are honored to have David Turk provide welcome remarks. Please roll the tape.
Colleen, thank you very much for the introduction and for your leadership at the EV Charging Initiative. This coalition is a force to be reckoned with and a key player in shaping EV charging policy across our country. I'm so grateful for your work to realize our shared vision for our EV future, starting with a national network of 500,000 chargers so folks can plug in wherever they live, work, and play. No more range anxiety, no more charging deserts. We're determined to make EV charging as convenient as filling up at the gas station. As President Biden likes to say, the great American road trip is going to be electrified, and I'd add, accessible and affordable to all. With your support and our partnership, we've got the will and the way to make it happen. Under the President's leadership, the Department of Energy is delivering historic investments to advance EV manufacturing and deployment nationwide. In 2021, at this very event, Secretary Granholm announced our joint office with the Department of Transportation, which has had a very busy 2 years. Supporting the Federal Highway Administration, the Joint Office is ensuring our federal investment of $7.5 billion for charging infrastructure reaches communities across our nation. And that complements more than $130 billion in new private investment across the EV ecosystem. Just last week, we opened applications for the EV Charger Reliability and Accessibility Accelerator, which delivers $100 million to repair and replace any existing infrastructure that needs some TLC. But as we all know, federal action alone isn't enough. We need true partnership across the public and private sector, from manufacturing and real estate and electrical companies to state and local policymakers to scientists, climate leaders, and community organizations. We need all of you. The EV market has to be collaborative to be successful, and this coalition has modeled that at every turn. Your work to clear hurdles and get folks on board with our vision is so critical, particularly at the state and local level. So please keep at it and know that you've got a partner, a true partner in the federal government. We've made so much progress in the 5 years since the first EV charging summit. Just imagine how much further and faster we can go if we keep our foot on the accelerator. Together, we can put more steel in the ground, more notches in the U.S. battery belt, and more EV tires on the pavement. Together, we can make our vision for the great electrified American road trip a reality. Thank you again and enjoy the summit.
Well, thank you, David, for your remarks. I must say your description of the National EV Charging Initiative as a force to be reckoned with underscores that we are a determined group, aimed solely on making this a success. Having a true partner in the federal government is so important to this endeavor. Thank you for your leadership. Speaking of a true partner, our next keynote speaker is Drew Kojak. Drew has recently taken the responsibility as Senior Director of Transportation Emissions at the White House Climate Policy Office. Drew is an environmental attorney with more than 25 years of experience working to address air pollution from vehicles and fuels. He previously served as attorney advisor to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, during which time he contributed to the regulatory developments of major rulemakings. Thank you, Drew, for making time for us today.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for inviting me to present today and give some opening thoughts. I've got three main messages to give you today. The first is to underscore the importance of charging in order to decarbonize the U.S. on-road transportation sector. One of this initiative's top-line principles is that a new level of collaboration among all stakeholders is required to meet the Biden administration's goals for transportation electrification. I have to say, in my more than 25 years in working on vehicle regulations, that is a simple but profound statement. Before electric vehicles, when we were doing motor vehicle tailpipe standards, the range of stakeholders was relatively narrow. We had the auto industry, sometimes we had the oil industry, we had environmental stakeholders, we had states that were focused on non-attainment dates. But since the advent of electric vehicles over the last 5 years, these regulations are far more complex. The number of stakeholders that are required to make them successful is far greater. There are a large number of businesses involved, from utilities to charging companies to new entrants in the vehicle market. Civil society is broader, with equity groups and social justice groups. Government includes not only just the non-attainment states, but all states and cities as well, and local government. So it's far more complicated, it's far more pervasive, and it underscores the importance of the National Electric Vehicle Charging Initiative's focus on bringing all of these parties together. So while it seems relatively simple, I have to say that it is profound and essential. So that's my first point, just to really underscore just how important this effort is. Let me talk a little bit about where we are with vehicle emission standards. The US EPA earlier this year put out two major regulatory proposals, one on light-duty vehicles and one on heavy-duty vehicles. Both of those will be finalized over the next 6 to 9 months. And if finalized as proposed, they would result in 9.1 gigatons of avoided climate pollution. To put that into context, that's the equivalent of more than 80 coal-fired power plants operating for more than 3 decades. One of the benefits of these standards is that they provide the regulatory certainty necessary to attract private investments in charging infrastructure at the scale and pace that we need to meet our climate, air quality, and equity goals. And again, critically important is the work that this initiative is doing. Third point is to mention, as David Turk has already mentioned, that the Biden administration is investing billions into charging infrastructure, both for light-duty vehicles and for heavy-duty vehicles. But we know that government investments alone are insufficient, and we need complementary private investments and state policies to support them and expand them and accelerate them. So the model policies that you will be discussing today in the 4 pillars that this initiative is focused on are absolutely critical to making all of these regulations and all these policies successful, and to achieving all of the potential gigatons that are on the table. So I'd like to close simply by thanking everyone who's involved in this initiative. I'd like to thank NRDC for all the work that you've done and for inviting me to give these opening remarks. This is a critical effort. I've enjoyed looking and understanding what the members are doing here, and I wish you a very successful and productive summit.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Drew, for your important remarks. I'm told that our next speaker, Michael Burby, is trying to get on to the summit. I'm not sure if he has been able to do that. I think I'll hear from the group when he does get on. I think in the meantime, we might as well go forward with our first panel. I apologize that we've had a little change in the the program, but let's roll with it. Let me start by saying right now we'll transition to the hearing format that we discussed in the very beginning, getting testimony and discussion around the 4 pillars. By the way, we're going to make every effort to turn this into what I'm calling a plain English discussion, and not get into the weeds. So here we go. Our first session of the day will feature a greatest hit model bill enacted in California and is focused on rules to reduce the cost of installing charging by 25%, making the provision of make-ready infrastructure the normal course of utility business. This session will be led by Kevin Miller, Senior Advisor of Business Models at the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. Kevin now leads the efforts to develop policies and programs to unleash significant, sustainable private investment in zero-emission vehicles and infrastructure, right up our alley, and serves as subject matter expert for clean transportation business models. I had the honor of working closely with Kevin as he led important policy initiatives to support a viable EV charging market during his tenure at ChargePoint. He has walked the walk, and I can guarantee you he talks the talk. We are thrilled to have him lead this discussion. Take it away, Kevin.
Thank you very much, Colleen. It's a real pleasure to participate in today's event. I can't thank y'all enough for organizing it. It's a critically important discussion, and let's dive right in. So the topic for the first panel today is make-ready infrastructure rules. I'll start by introducing the Joint Office for those of you who aren't familiar, provide context for the topic at hand, and then introduce my esteemed co-panelists to provide their perspectives. And then we'll transition the remainder of the time for the session to questions, answers, and, if we're lucky, spirited dialogue on the topic. So again, I'm Kevin Miller, Senior Advisor with the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. If you're not familiar, the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation is a federal office established under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law that's intended to align the resources and expertise of both the U.S. Department of Energy and the U.S. Department of Transportation. The Joint Office aims to accelerate electrified transportation systems that are convenient, reliable, affordable, accessible, and equitable so that everyone can ride and drive electric. In my role, I focus on the things that Colleen already laid out, so I won't bore you with that. Let's dive right into the topic. So make ready. We'll be talking about make-ready infrastructure for EV charging stations. If you're not familiar with that, it's a term intended to capture all the infrastructure, construction, and labor needed to prepare a site to bolt down an EV charger. Make-ready is split into 2 categories, depending on whether that infrastructure and work is taking place on the utilities side of the electricity meter or the customer side of the meter. So utility side make-ready and customer side make-ready. We're focusing on utility side make-ready today. So why does it matter? All right, across more than 30 states, regulators have authorized 50 to 60 some odd investor-owned utility programs to invest $6 billion in programs that accelerate EV adoption, generally by supporting the deployment of charging infrastructure for light, medium, and heavy-duty vehicles. Right? Of that $6 billion, $2 billion targets underserved communities. And that's not even counting the many investments that are going on through rural electric cooperatives, municipal utilities, and other public power agencies that are partnering with the private sector to help deploy critically important infrastructure. So many of these programs do provide both utility side and customer side make ready, and even rebates or incentives to support the deployment of EV charging. In general, the way that this takes place is an opaque process, right? There are programs that are approved and reviewed that have fixed budgets and fixed timelines through a quasi-judicial process. When those programs run out of room, either budgetary or they run out of time, the clock runs out, they come to a halt. So before that can reinitiate or continue, that type of program needs to be re-reviewed, resubmitted, reauthorized. So one-off programs like this are valuable, right? Insofar as they support the deployment of more net charging ports than the market might have done so alone. And perhaps more importantly, demonstrating the value to all communities and electric ratepayers, whether they own an EV or not, that the deployment of flexible loads like EV charging can be an asset to the grid, put a downward pressure on electricity rates, and support local economies and increase equitable access to clean transportation. But even though those are good things, an iterative stop-start approach has its downsides, right? It's unpredictable, it's inconsistent, it's time-consuming, and it's resource-intensive, which historically are not adjectives that folks traditionally associate with businesses or operating models that are poised for rapid and scaled growth. So this is why it's important. We heard from David Turk, we just heard from Drew Kojak that there are clear Biden-Harris administration, federal, and on top of all the state and local goals to support transportation electrification. We know that we're on track to achieve goals, right? We saw earlier this summer, the National Renewable Energy Lab released a study, the 2030 National Charging Network Study, that identified that the United States is on track to install a network of 1.2 million public chargers by 2030. And of that 1.2 million ports, we'll see a mix of different types of charging technologies. But that's a snapshot in time. Where we are now is a snapshot in time. It doesn't happen by itself. What do we need to get there? An outcome that's more consistent, predictable, and harmonized will make better use of federal funds that have already been authorized by Congress, lower barriers for businesses and communities, and be one of the keys to really unlocking sustainable and scalable growth in the EV charging market. So this conversation is really topical. Even if you're not someone who has had the pleasure, like some on this panel and others who are in attendance have had to participate in some of these proceedings where these types of really important programs have been developed, I hope that sort of underscores and sets the stage for why it's so important. So now I'd like to pause with my pontificating and turn it over to the co-panelists, where we're going to hear from them, and then we'll go on to discussion thereafter. So I believe next up will be Max Baumhefner, a senior attorney with the Natural Resources Defense Council. Max?
Thank you, Kevin. So I believe, as Drew Kojak noted, the 35 plus members of the National EV Charging Initiative collectively represent the right team to get this job done. And it's a diverse, broad stakeholder group that hasn't always agreed on everything. The same holds for NRDC, the automakers represented by Dan, and in many different venues. But I think there's broad support for this bedrock policy that we're going to be talking about today. In many ways, the initiative, bridges two huge sectors of the economy, the transportation sector and the electric sector. And the make-ready infrastructure is where those two literally connect. And all four pillars of the model policies and model legislation that the Charging Initiative is considering represent and are based upon state bills that were passed with broad stakeholder support from all corners of the many stakeholders that Drew rightly pointed out are necessary to get this job done. The bill that we're talking about in this panel is based upon legislation that was sponsored by IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, who had hoped to join this discussion but had an irreconcilable conflict. And it stated, and Colleen, I beg your forgiveness, I'm going to get a little into the weeds right here, but just to quote, it said that the purpose of this section is to change the practice of authorizing electrical distribution system infrastructure located on the utility side of the meter needed to charge electric vehicles on a case-by-case basis to a practice of considering that infrastructure and associated design, engineering, and construction work as core utility business, treated the same as other distribution infrastructure authorized on an ongoing basis in the Electrical Corporation's general rate case. So what does that mean in plain English? That means that fundamental connection between the meter that goes to the charging station and the grid is provided just as part of the grid, essentially, to all comers. And that if that policy were universally adopted, if we needed, say, $200 billion to invest in charging infrastructure for cars, trucks, and buses, this policy, if universally adopted, would take care of around $50 billion of that, significantly reducing the collective necessary investment. I think of it as providing a foundation upon which we can build this electric transportation house together, a foundation upon which other federal, state, and private investments can be layered. And I think it's a political sweet spot where there's broad support. And I hope we can, spread this policy across the country quickly and rapidly.
Fantastic. Thank you, Max, for providing that context for the meat and potatoes of what we're actually talking about. It's helpful to understand the status quo and where it could go. And you've been living and breathing that. So that's invaluable context. We appreciate that. Next, I'd like to throw it over to Dan Bowerson, the Alliance for Automated Innovation. It'd be great to hear from you and get a sense of why this policy is important to you and your members.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Kevin. And thanks for Max for kind of setting the stage of what's in this policy. Obviously, this is extremely important to the auto industry to meet our stated electrification goals. But maybe before I get into that, just a little background on the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. We are the national trade association for the light-duty vehicle industry. We represent manufacturers that produce most vehicles sold in the U.S. We also have autonomous vehicle innovators, equipment suppliers, battery producers, and semiconductor makers. We're active in Washington, D.C. and all 50 states across the country. And we represent an industry that supports 10 million American jobs and 5% of the economy. Now, we're obviously committed to electrifying light-duty vehicles. Global investment in electrification is expected to reach $1.2 trillion. Again, $1.2 trillion globally by 2030. As a result of this, we're seeing the number of models and availability of models growing. We expect to see over 160 EV models, which include battery electric, fuel cell electric, and plug-in hybrid within the next few years. Just recently, we're actually over 100 available EV models in the US today. These vehicles are comfortable, they're reliable, and they're fun to drive. And as a result, we're seeing EV market share grow from just over 2% 4 years ago to over 9% this year to date. We're already building electrified cars and trucks in volumes that we've never seen before. At the same time, as Drew mentioned, the industry is facing federal and state regulations that are going to require manufacturers to sell significantly more EVs by the end of the decade. But to make that transition to EVs smoothly and successfully, we need to do more than just build the vehicles. While consumers are increasingly receptive to EVs, there are still factors that weigh on their minds when thinking about making the jump to electric vehicles. Like what? I'd say foremost among them are the concerns about being able to recharge the vehicles wherever and whenever they drive them. Although roughly 80% of EV charging takes place at home, more options are needed. This includes affordable and readily available charging and hydrogen fueling infrastructure, easy to understand utility rate structures that reward off-peak charging, and improve charging and refueling times. And believe me, consumers look at all of these factors before buying or leasing an electric vehicle. Collaboration between the public and private sectors has never been more important to meet the challenge of transitioning America's fleets to electric. The shift to EVs also means expanded roles for utilities, energy regulators, and other stakeholders to create opportunities for new and existing businesses to participate in this clean transformation. With this in mind, the Alliance for Automotive Innovation remains committed to partnering with public and private sector stakeholders to advocate for policies that create viable and sustainable business models, attract new capital sources, and stimulate competition and innovation to successfully accomplish this shift. The automotive and electric power industries are certainly converging. If you think about it this way, throughout the history of these two industries, we've very much traveled separate paths and grew to vast scale by the end of the 20th century. Utilities bought cars and trucks to support their operations, and the auto industries purchased electricity to light offices and power factories. Today, our customers are increasingly see electric utilities as the enabler to reliable and affordable mobility. The 21st century, transportation electrification will drive electric utilities load growth as a rapid adoption for air conditioning did in the mid-20th century. We are at a pivotal time in the journey to cleaner, safer, and smarter transportation future, And with timely, focused, and sustained leadership and investment from a variety of public and private shareholders, customers can finally realize the full benefits of EVs. Hence our participation in this very important initiative. I really appreciate, as Kevin mentioned, NRDC's leadership here, along with the initiative. And Kevin, look forward to some of the discussion and questions.
Fantastic. Thank you for that and for giving context for how the auto industry has been leading into the transition to electric vehicles and all the thorny regulatory and policy and legal issues that come along with it as we unify what had previously been siloed parts of the world and the policy debate. It's an exciting time. So knowing that there's a lot to unpack here, could you help, this is an open question to both panelists, could you help us understand what each of your organizations are doing to advance this transition to a more sustainable regulatory framework, more predictable, consistent framework that isn't so start and stop? And do you have thoughts about what are ways that different stakeholders can and should get involved in that in their own communities and states?
Yeah, I could take it first, Max, if that's all right with you. I think, something that has become more prevalent on the auto side is we are becoming more and more engaged on the utility proceedings, looking at, to this policy, opportunities for make ready, looking at how things have typically been done in the utility industry in terms of expected load growth and planning for that, and looking at what transportation may mean for that. We can't be in a place where we have these vehicles on the road and now we're suddenly thinking about how the grid is going to adapt to that increased load. So getting the message out, having auto industry representation in Public Utility Commission proceedings, working with NARUC on some of their policies through the EV Working Group. That's kind of how we're doing this. And I certainly, it had been a bunch of automotive engineers learning the utility side. Now you're seeing even previous utility employees working for the car companies, right? So it's kind of this transition where we really are converging between both the power and the automotive industries.
Yeah, and I'd add, I think the four pillars of the model legislation that the Charging Initiative is discussing today are focused on utility policies because they are an industry with an infinite capacity to speed this up or slow this down. And they're state-focused policies, which I think, as Senator Hickenlooper will know later, it's the states that regulate the electric industry at the retail level. So we can't just do this federally. That's a challenge because there's 50 states and there's thousands of utilities. Thankfully, there are a lot of model policies that have a proven track record of success. And we think that those can proliferate quickly. And we're discussing four here today that I think have a track record of success and broad stakeholder support, which bode well for their adoption in red, blue, and purple states across the union. And I think that will require a team effort, like we've described. And it does require public utilities commissions to get engaged, for utilities to propose innovative programs and investments. One advantage, I think, of this policy that we're just focusing in on here, the Make Ready infrastructure rules, that it's unlike a particular program with a fixed budget that runs out and provides intermittent support for the market. If done properly, the goal of this Make Ready infrastructure rule is to provide a more steady foundation. And it's a logical extension of existing utility line extension policies that provide some level of utility support for the installation of that. But that's generally kind of non-uniform, highly variable, and not as predictable or as generous as the policy that we're describing today that's meant to provide a foundation for us all to build and close the charging infrastructure gap.
Thank you both for those perspectives. I think it's great to hear a little bit more about how you're actively rolling your sleeves up and what others can and should think about as they consider this as a potential policy to lean into. One thing that I think might help And I guess we'll try to avoid the weeds on this, Max, but to contrast status quo, an iterative one program approval by program approval basis versus a streamlined, consistent, clear, transparent policy across the board, how would you compare the process to getting those programs approved to what it would be like to sail through a consistent approach in what we're considering here?
Yeah, and the way that the utility programs that are designed to support transportation electrification, which is going to be discussed in the next panel, I really think of those as critical to especially go after, segments of the market that are underserved and segments where we need an extra push. But those are generally approved via this protracted quasi-judicial process at state public utilities commissions. That's not really well suited to the policy considerations. It's sort of you're shoehorning in a discussion of policy into a quasi-judicial process that with testimony and rebuttal testimony and briefs, and that takes a really long time and fundamentally is meant to judge the evidence at the hand to review utility investments in a different form, and it doesn't work so well for providing that long duration of support that we need to achieve this long-term transition. So I think there are some kind of regulatory advantages to having the state legislature say this is going to be the new rule, and having the utility propose those rules and the PUC approve them, and then just having those be on the books and having everybody able to count on them.
Thank you, Max. Dan, we often talk about goals and targets and how to achieve them, whether to achieve them. From the automaker's perspective, do you believe we're on track to meet EV charging installation goals? If not, how do we get to that point of inflection, to that hockey stick of growth? And where are the best ways to pursue this type of policy in order to get there?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I don't know that we're on the right track. I think there's still a significant gap of needed infrastructure. And even if we're able to suit the vehicles that are on the road today, my concern is there's going to be more and more vehicles coming on the road tomorrow, next year. And if we don't have the infrastructure being planned now or already have been planned, we're going to get to a point where we're falling behind. This is as I mentioned, the top reason for people not purchasing EVs or for hesitancy is, concern of where am I going to be able to charge and when can I charge? So I think we've seen a great increase. I don't think we're necessarily on track to meet those goals. I think how we get there is some of the conversations we're having today through the initiative, looking at policies that maybe we're talking about the automotive industry transforming. The utility industry, as Max mentioned, also needs to look at this. It's no longer on the transportation side. It typically was, a builder raises their hand and saying, building a neighborhood here, I'm going to need this load in, a year and a half. We're seeing vehicles that are going to be on the road very, very quickly. We can't wait for that grid upgrade. So I think some of the policies that we have, the make ready that we're talking about today, the other three pillars, I think those are really how we get there. And this collaboration between auto sector, utility, NGOs, all of us talking together, working with the joint office to ensure that the policies we're putting in place are going to meet the needs of our customers today and those down the line that are going to be looking to purchase these vehicles that'll be coming on the road.
Yeah, I'd agree with Dan and note that, the focus of the fourth pillar today will be on getting it built and energized, which addresses some of the challenges to which he alluded. And I think that the four pillars kind of work in a complementary fashion. Of course, in some states, not all four pillars will be necessary. Some will already be in place, but I think it's a package. And there's some thought behind that and a lot of input from the diverse membership of the charging initiative to inform it.
So knowing that reasonable minds can disagree about all different kinds of topics, one thing that I think might help as we think through, how to ensure more consistency and streamlining of these types of policies in states around the country, given that all states are regulating this themselves. Are there lessons that we can learn from the experience in California, where concerns may have been cited about taking this from an iterative one-off approach to a streamlined approach? And how were those concerns addressed to ensure that this would be fair, reasonable, and just for all communities, for all ratepayers, and for taxpayers?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are specific provisions of the law that were essentially cost containment provisions that were baked in to ensure that the vision of electrifying the transportation sector benefiting all utility customers comes to pass. And that vision is basically premised upon, taking hundreds of billions of dollars that would otherwise go to international oil companies and using it to pay for the grid and to improve the utilization of the grid, which has a ton of spare capacity in it. And when you improve its utilization, largely through off-peak charging, since, as Dan mentioned, 80% of vehicle charging can happen at home, and most of all that can happen when you're asleep. You're basically bringing in billions of new dollars in excess of associated costs, reducing the price per kilowatt hour to the benefit of all utility customers. This is not a theoretical proposition. We've commissioned a history of studies that have documented this phenomenon as already occurring over the last decade, with EV drivers across the United States having already contributed almost $2 billion in excess of associated costs, money that's already been returned to other utility customers in the form of rates that are lower than they otherwise would be. And there's forward-looking studies that demonstrate this potential too. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, the California Public Advocate's Office, which is the official utility watchdog for the state of California, did a pretty comprehensive report that looked at both the costs associated with upgrading the grid to accommodate electrification of cars, trucks, buses, you name it, and electric buildings, the whole electric enchilada, and then contrasted that to the anticipated revenue and concluded that in basically all instances, that electrification project would reduce rates to the benefit of all utility customers. So that's a huge story and a credible messenger. There's obviously that analysis contains caveats that we have to do this right, and we need policies to ensure that we're doing it right, which are many of which we're discussing here today.
And if I can just add, Kevin, I think we should certainly look to California and see what lessons we can learn, specifically to what Max said. I mean, if we look at just the national market year to date, we're at about 9% EV sales in 2023 to now. California is over 26%. So obviously they've had a head start in what's worked for them and what's not, and what can we learn from that, and recognizing that not everywhere is California, so there's going to have to be provisions that we look at, but are there opportunities or synergies that we can look to take to other states as well?
Yeah, I have a long history of being the curly-haired enviro showing up from California and other states and saying, we should do it this way. And I think, that we have to lead with not just our successes, but our setbacks, and be humble about that. But I think, just as Dan noted, there's just so many real-world lessons from a decade of experience with, hundreds of thousands of cars on the grid that, like, we don't need to test this. We don't need to pilot this. We know it works. It's based on real-world experience, not hypothesis.
Great. And knowing how regulators work state by state, they do have their own judicial decision history. They have their own contexts and frameworks. And you both alluded to the fact that what works in one scenario may not work in the other. So could you both share, as a final question, then we'll pivot to any concluding remarks that you both might have. Is this kind of an approach to streamline the process for utility make-ready flexible enough such that it can be adapted easily into different states, or is it going to be a square peg in a round hole?
I'll start. I think I mentioned that this is a kind of a natural extension of existing line extension policies. I think there are some line extension policies on the books in some states that largely already do this job, in which case we might not need to try to, hammer this square peg into that round hole. But I think it will require, like everything, an evaluation of the policy framework in any relevant state.
Great. Well, I think this has been a really fascinating discussion. I want to thank both Max and Dan for sharing their perspectives and insights about how we can take these types of approaches to really unleash sustainable and scalable growth in infrastructure deployment to support the transition to electric transportation, whether you ride or drive electric. I want to pause and just offer the opportunity for quick, 30-second final remarks. If there are any points that you were hoping to make, Max and Dan, that you weren't able to get to because of the way the questions weaved and wended.
I think I'll just reiterate, Kevin, the industry's commitment to electrification and working with the relevant stakeholders that we need to ensure that this is a smooth transition, whatever that timing is. We need to make sure that we're doing things now to ensure that our customers down the road, thinking of the customer first, making sure that they have convenient, reliable, and affordable charging. And a lot of that starts on the make-ready side and the policies we're talking about today.
And I think, just echo Drew's observation that this collective effort, by virtue of its diverse support, is in itself profound, and that this is weedy stuff, but it's incredibly important for the reasons he outlined. The actions that are pending are the biggest thing this country's ever done to address an existential crisis, and we need everybody pointing in the right direction, and I think we have that represented in this virtual room today. So I'm stoked.
All right, well, we'll end it with being stoked. So thank you all for listening into this panel, to the panelists for your perspectives, and we'll hand it back to the next session, or to rewind it back to Michael.
Yes, thanks everyone. I also want to comment on my comment about getting into the weeds. As a weekend gardener, I will say it is important to get into the weeds to bring the flowers forward. So there's a lot to gain from understanding these policies and putting the effort behind being able to achieve true scale to deliver on the Biden administration's promise and the objectives of the National EV Charging Initiative. So thank you all in this last panel, and thank you, Kevin, for leading this important discussion. We are going to wind it back a little bit and bring forward another really important partner from the federal government, Michael Burby, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Sustainable Transportation and Fuels at the U.S. Department of Energy. This is not Michael's first rodeo. He is truly a pioneer, in this market, and has been leading the effort at DOE for a fairly long time. He oversees EERE's Vehicle Bioenergy, Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Technologies Office, as well as the Joint Office. He's been an important collaborator to the initiative from the very beginning. He was featured at our first national summit in January of 2022, where he, along with a colleague from DOT, announced the creation of the Joint Office. Michael has recently been named to the EV Working Group, authorized by Congress, and we are thrilled to have him with us. Thank you for joining. I'm glad you got your tech situation figured out. Thanks,
Pauline,
Michael.
You would have think this is my first rodeo on a Zooms call. If you had seen me here, like, how can I not get this new computer? Obviously did not test it all out well enough with the Zoom application this morning. So my apologies, Colleen, but thank you to you, Nancy, and the others here in the NEVC coalition for all your work and for being flexible with my lack of tech proficiency. Had a chance to listen in. It was good to hear Max and Dan, and of course, Kevin Miller from our own joint office talking earlier. I guess I would like to just share a few thoughts, both, broadly on how are we doing and where are we going on EV charging, but then, a little bit specifically to what you're focusing on today, some of the issues about utility, rate structures, make design, make rate, I should say, all of those issues. So first, I will just say right up front, I believe we are going to get this done. meaning we are going to get the charging infrastructure we need to allow us to make the transition to electric vehicles that is clearly starting. We're now a few months in a row hitting 10%, maybe rounding 9.75, 10% EV sales. That will continue to grow. It won't grow if we don't get the infrastructure out there, the charging infrastructure, absolutely. But I think we will get that done. And the we is the big collective we, as the last panel said. It's public sector. It is a range of people in the private sector. It is EV charging companies. It is certainly automakers and truck makers. It is utilities. So it's going to take a broad group as well as coalitions like yours that you have here going on. So the question is, how, right? A lot of work has to happen. I will say one thing. I heard Dan's comment. I'll take it just a slight different twist on that. Are we on track? Actually, the data suggests we are. If you look at the investments that have been announced thus far and the number of charges we need to hit where we've got to be in 2030, we actually are on track. Now, that said, it's a little slow right at the beginning as the system is getting chargers in the ground, but that's kind of a little bit of a startup factor. And that investment needs to continue growing. So I'm not Pollyannish about that. It needs to continue. But so far, I think a lot of people, including Group of 7 automakers that have stepped up to form a new charging network. Of course, the Tesla network is very large and substantial. And the system that's being put in place through the NEVI program, the $7.5 billion in federal funds, right? Those are all the things that needed to happen and are in place to happen. So I would definitely look, there's a great NREL study that goes through and looks at that. So the question maybe I want to spend a minute is on, okay, how do we do it? What are the big challenges that need to happen there to get that growth to continue? First, I will say, we at DOE are laser focused on the question of managing this added load to the grid. When we look at the new added load, transportation, buildings, and industry that will be coming on the grid, and at the same time, simultaneously transforming the grid to a very, very low greenhouse gas grid ultimately net zero, right? Doing these simultaneously. We understand the challenge of that. We also know that actually the way to get that done is by doing them together and having them work synergistically. Transportation will be by far the biggest chunk of that new load. And it needs to be a manageable load, meaning a load that you can manage the timing of so we can flatten those load curves and ultimately not require the amount of new investment you would require if you were planning just for really peaky load. So both because of the nature of the changes of the grid, moving away from more spinning reserve type grids and more solid state, as well as just keeping investment down. EVs actually can be a huge part of that solution. So that is where we are focusing a lot of our time. We are actually putting together right now, pulling together a range of programs that we have had going here into a much larger effort, recognizing the size of the need to work on the whole idea of what we would call VGI, vehicle grid integration, integrating these two things together. So we talked earlier about there's some rate design questions, so that's a big part of this. It's about getting the experience, it's about getting the communication capability, so the communication from the vehicle to the utility with the EV charging providers, of course, right in the middle. So we have to come to some agreement, quite honestly, among broadly those three big parties, aggregators, and as well as how are we going to manage that communication? Who's going to send what signal to whom? To some degree, it's pretty basic. Like, who's going to lead in this dance? Doesn't do a lot of good to be on the dance floor dancing by yourself, but someone's got to lead or you're stepping on each other's feet. So analogy, I think, is pretty apt here. So we as government are going to try to play a role to bring parties together and have that good conversation, ultimately with the end goal being providing a affordable, low-cost charging experience to consumers that works well, and that also makes sure that we have a grid that serves all customers, right? Which is ultimately what the Public Utility Commission's role is. As part of that, we're going to be working a lot with PUCs and Public Utility Commissions because they have the responsibility to make sure that those utility investments make sense, and they need investment quality data as well as utilities. So while we've had a number of demos, we at DOE have funded some, utilities in some cases, we need actually some more. In some cases, we just need to pull together what's worked, what hasn't worked. And we need experience and data that is solid enough that a utility can make a decision to not put in a major power plant, but instead put investment to support EV charging distribution or whatever other programs they need there. And a PUC has to be comfortable with that as well. And it has to be done in a way that keeps downward pressure on rates. One of the biggest promises of EVs, as we know, is that low operating cost, that low cost of fueling it. If that goes away because we're raising electricity rates, then it just doesn't work for a number of reasons, right? Obviously. So keeping that downward pressure on rates, it's going to take a lot of cooperation and communication. So that's a lot of what we are going to focus on this coming year. Maybe just one last comment I'll make, just to give you a sense of how we are thinking then about these loads. We broadly are dividing the world, this transportation electrification, in two big groups. We have some very large concentrated point loads, think ports, airports, a large truck charging depot, a transit depot. So, it's a large point load, but there's a capability to manage within the load itself, maybe put local power generation, backup storage, and help manage the load there, obviously working closely with utilities. And then on the second hand, you have a large number of disaggregated, non-coordinated charging points. So think 250,000 EVs charging in my service territory as utility. So how do we manage each one of those cases? They're each a little different. What we are trying to do is create programs that are replicatable in each case. So if it's airports, we have a major new program with airports, working with airports across the country, rental car companies, TNCs at the airports, package delivery companies. So we have all the players at the table working with a few airports to create the right templates that then can be spread and used at other airports. Same thing with maritime ports or truck charging depots. So in the same way, working with cities, utilities, municipalities on the home charging, how do we get enough confidence in data that then can be quickly scaled and replicated? In everything we do, I think, as Max said, the urgency is here to solve the climate, or address, I should say, rather than solve the climate challenge in front of us. So we have to be working at things that can be scalable and replicatable quickly across the country. So with that, Colleen, I'll end. I probably used more than my 4 or 5 minutes there, but I wanted to share a little how we're thinking about things here at DOE. I'm so glad you had a chance to hear from Deputy Secretary Turk earlier, since I think it was Deputy Secretary Trottenberg from DOT that was with me 2 years ago when we kicked this all off.
We absolutely. Thank you, Michael. I love the fact that you're using a new metaphor. A lot of times we use the team metaphor, but the dance metaphor is one I can really get behind. It might have started at the high school prom, but man, this is a big dance, a very big dance, and a huge opportunity. I'm so thrilled that you are in the position where you are as a trusted leader in our space. We need trust as we formulate these dance partners. Trust is very important for our success. And also, I agree with you. This is going to be successful. We are going to do this. As Mike Bloomberg says, we can't screw this up. So this is our opportunity. This is our moment. And thank you for everything you do to contribute to this progress. So
thank you, guys.
Okay, we're going to move now to our next session, which I'm very thrilled to introduce right now. The next session builds upon the $6 billion that Max mentioned, already approved in utility programs to accelerate EV deployment. This session will explore the need for utility transportation electrification plans. Our greatest hits for this session draw on several landmark efforts in California and Colorado, and will be led by policymaker and moderator, Michigan Public Service Commission, Catherine Paratek. Catherine's a member of the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners. In August of 2022, she became chair of the important NARUC Electric Vehicle State Working Group. This is the group that leads the conversation on regulatory topics for electric vehicles and EV charging. Catherine also serves on the board of the World Resources Institute Electric School Bus Initiative, as well as on the board of EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute Advisory Council. Her leadership role and approach will undoubtedly be innovative and insightful. She's joined today by representatives of the utility industry, the auto industry, and the important transportation equity perspective. Commissioner, you have the virtual floor.
Thanks so much, Colleen. Really appreciate that that lovely introduction. I'm just thrilled to be a part of this important discussion right now. This is so timely and so important for us to be talking about the progress in the future in this way. As Colleen mentioned, I'm a commissioner on the Michigan Public Service Commission. I've been in this role for just about 2.5 years now. And my state of Michigan is the heart of the traditional automotive industry and home to the original big three automakers. Detroit's nickname is the Motor City, and since its existence, it has grown, shrunk, changed, evolved, and is now really looking optimistically at the future of electric vehicles. The auto industry is also very important to me personally. My father spent 34 years as an engineer at Ford, and my very first job was actually in a General Motors transmission assembly plant as an intern. So in addition to my responsibilities as commissioner, as Colleen mentioned, I'm also the chair of the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, or the NARUC, Electric Vehicle State Working Group, which is important because it brings energy commissioners and commission staff across the country together once a month to discuss the opportunities and challenges that we're having with electric vehicles in our states in a very open and frank conversation, and really share ideas directly with each other for how to implement good regulations. So as an energy regulator, I really am staring down these huge changes to our electric system that are coming at us right now. The way we generate and use electricity now is much different than even just 10 years ago. And I think when we look at the 10 years into the future, generation and usage will look even more different. I think the pace of change right now is even greater than it has been when we look backwards. And that's why the theme of today's summit really is so important: bold policies in action, or in my case, bold regulations in action. So the utility programs and investments in the electricity sector for electric vehicles and their charging infrastructure really will be key, not only to supporting EV development, but also to ensuring equitable distribution of that infrastructure, equitable access, and equitable impacts of the energy transition and the transportation transition. So I wanted to give just a couple examples of what we're doing at the Michigan Public Service Commission to prepare for this transition. First, we have some bold pilot programs with our utilities for charger development, and also for some creative ownership models. For example, in a recent rate case, we approved an ownership structure for an electric city bus, where the city buys the bus, but the utility buys the battery that powers the bus. And then the city pays the utility back in small increments over time. It's a pay-as-you-save model, but for electric city bus batteries. We're also requiring the development and publishing of maps that show where grid capacity currently exists to hook up large loads. And these large loads could possibly be for fleet electrification or a bank of fast chargers that will help and having an ability to see on a map where that exists will help accelerate deployment and reduce the costs for large charging depots. We're also requiring utilities to plan for the future of EVs as part of their distribution plans. So we're doing this idea of transportation electrification planning as a part of our distribution planning process, which then they file with us at the commission. And then last, importantly, and maybe not emphasized or utilized enough. We leverage our convening power at the commission. And this is an incredibly powerful tool that we have as a state commission to get the right people in the same room, either literally or virtually, and make people talk to each other. This has been really valuable, we have found, in the electric vehicle space, and we continue to leverage this tool. We're currently planning an electric vehicle technical conference in the next few months to focus on the transition from utility EV pilots to permanent programs. But that's enough about me and what I'm doing. I have a panel of 3 experts here who will now be able to give their testimony on utility transportation electrification plans. So I'd like to begin with Phil Dion, SVP of Customer Solutions at EEI. Phil?
Oh, Commissioner, thank you. Good to see you. And as somebody who's spent time in the halls of the commissions, thanks for your service, balancing all those competing interests. And now we've got more folks who are joining the party. Certainly is going to be a tough job. It's certainly an important one. What I would say is I just would follow on a little bit from the last panel and talk a little bit about, what we do. So first and foremost, EEI, or the Edison Electric Institute, we represent the investor-owned utilities across the United States, power the homes and businesses of nearly 250 million Americans, and about 7 million people work for the members. So fairly significant. And I think that was really interesting. A little bit in the last panel, Dan noted about the same numbers for the audio industry, and Commissioner, you'd be much more familiar with those numbers than I would. So you have, literally these 2 behemoths, interconnecting, I think was kind of the fun way that we were talking about it. And one of the things that I think we want to talk a little bit about is there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on in this transition, and I'm going to focus a lot on electric vehicles, but I want to just note very quickly, data centers are on the rise, distributed energy resources are on the rise, batteries standalone are on the rise. There's a lot of things that are happening during this transition. And so, your leadership out in Michigan to include things like electric vehicle transportation in the distribution planning, that is key. That is key to all of this. We can get there. We've talked a lot about what's coming and a little bit of the tsunami that I mentioned, but from electric vehicles, one of the things that we do have is a little bit of time, but not much, right? So vehicles turn over, about every 7 years. Adam Benshoff is here. He'll correct all of my numbers. But the bottom line is that we're not going all electric immediately. However, we are moving at a pace, and the competing interest for energy from those data centers, heat pumps, a lot of other ththings that are out there, it means that we really have to start planning this now. I would note we've gotten a lot of help. A lot of commissions have done this. And I think one of the most important statistics of that, we talk about that $6 billion, nearly half of that is in states where they don't necessarily have a climate program or an electric transportation program. They're leading the way. States are leading the way. They are those democracies, but they're out there. They're out there because they know essentially what I said. This takes years to plan and construct, right? So we used to have the ability to major things that would come to our service territories. You got to get them permitted. You've got to build them. Skyscrapers take a few years to do. Adam and his company could deliver 200 electric vehicles, in less than 18 months to a client. So this large load, this large point source, especially on the fleet side, not necessarily on the home side, but on the fleet side, that's the thing that we have to do. And these areas, I think it was National Grid who's made some fantastic filings, but along the corridor that they're talking about up in the Northeast, they're talking about these situations like a football stadium, right? And I kind of harken back that 100,000 people, that's quite a large load that's showing up. So we've got to make sure that we get that right and we proactively upgrade the grid. One of the things I want to mention in my opening statements is House Bill 3218 in Massachusetts. A lot of great things are going on in California. A lot of great things are happening in Michigan. But this House bill is out there, and it's essentially it's bringing together the planners, the electric planners, the DOTs, and they're saying, all right, where are those no regrets areas where it makes a lot of sense for us? And it's actively working with each other to collaboratively plan and make sure that we get those things right. There will be some mistakes, right? So just to be very clear, there will be some mistakes, but one of the things that we did at EEI regarding our National Electric Highway Corridor was we said, look, we understand that these corridors and these things are out ahead of their time a little bit, and they may not all pencil. However, when you look at the totality, when you look at the vehicles that are there, when you look at the vehicles that are charging overnight, if you look at the totality of the circumstances, that's where the infrastructure and the investments make sense, because those vehicles are going to sit at home 80% of the time. They're going to charge at night, and they are going to lower the cost of the overall system everywhere else. So if you begin looking at these investments and things like this in a point source, you're going to get the wrong answer. You've got to look globally. And the last thing I'll say in working globally is we serve everyone, no matter who you are, no matter where you are in our service territory. And I know Ramon is going to talk a lot about this as well. And I'm going to have to chime in, Ramon. I have to, but you know, we take this public service thing seriously, and we cannot have a two-tiered electric system. We can't have a two-tiered transmission system. There is a baseline that everyone should enjoy regarding the clean, reliable, and affordable future that electric transportation and all of electrification provides. So I'll stop there and wait for all the questions, but thank you very much, Commissioner, for the time.
Thanks, Phil. Really appreciate that. Next, we have Adam Benshoff, who heads global EV policy at Ford Motor Company. Adam?
Thank you so much, Commissioner, and always a pleasure to be on a panel, especially with Mr. Dion. I'm sure he'll take issue with so much of what I say. But first, just a little bit about myself. As the Commissioner said, I'm Adam Benshoff. I head up EV policy for a plucky little EV startup in Dearborn, Michigan, that some of you may have heard of, Ford Motor Company. I think, as many of you have probably seen in our commercials and driving around, we are all in on electrification. We've started this process by electrifying our nameplates. We've got the Mustang Mach-E, the #1 selling vehicle, not the #1 selling truck, but the #1 selling vehicle in America for the last 40 years, the F-150, that is now the F-150 Lightning. And then I think really importantly, and to a point that Phil touched on, we've electrified the E-Transit, a significant fleet vehicle, and really, I think, driving some phenomenal adoption. Ford is actually the #2 EV producer in vehicles in 2022. For any of you that have heard my boss, Jim Farley, speak, that is not our goal. Our goal is #1, and we are looking actually at a run rate of about 600,000 EVs by 2024. So by next year, there will be over 600,000 EVs rolling off of Ford production lines. To accommodate that public infrastructure, and this discussion is particularly important, we obviously have our Blue Oval network that some folks have heard of. It is North America's largest public charging network with 26,000 charging locations, 4,200 DC fast chargers. It's not Ford owned, but we utilize and leverage partnerships with EVSEs across the country. And our goal really is to simplify that experience for our customers, make that a one-stop shop. And I couldn't be more excited back in May when we announced the addition of the Tesla Supercharger network to the Blue Oval network. So we'll be more than doubling the capacity of that network for our customers here next year. And that is, I think, critically important. A Consumer Reports study back in April found that charging logistics was one of the biggest factors holding customers back. And a recent poll by the Energy Policy Institute at the University of Chicago found that while more than half of US adults said that they would buy an EV as their next car, nearly 80% said that a lack of charging stations was a key factor. Now, there are a number of studies out there that highlight the runway that we have to electrify transportation and the significant opportunities that are presented by things like managed charging, as Phil mentioned. There's a great PNNL study that looked at just the Western Interconnect, so just WEC, and that managed charging could potentially extend that runway between 5 and 15 years. And I'm hopeful that folks saw, but just last week, Ford, BMW, and Honda announced the formation of a company that we call ChargeScape, that's really designed to help integrate and simplify that experience for utilities and our customers in setting up these managed charging programs. And kind of with all that said, though, electric distribution infrastructure, where almost all of this charging is going to occur, it tends to be a very local issue. And I think it's critically important that we don't wait until we exhaust that runway to start the conversation with electric companies and with utility regulators, Commissioner, like yourself. And again, thank you for your leadership in this space. But we really need to start talking about what is going to be needed to make sure that the system is ready. And I think today's conversation is a fantastic step in that direction. This forward type planning is really important. It's going to reduce wait times for customers. It's going to reduce delays in EVSE deployment, both in public charging and then in another critical area, that depot and fleet charging. Some folks may not be aware, but Ford actually has an industry-leading fleet business through our Ford Pro brand. And we're getting feedback from some of our customers that they're hearing that given the time for necessary upgrades, their window could be 5 to 7 years. And frankly, that's just not going to cut it in the timelines that we're looking at and the demand that we're seeing from customers. So I think as we start to look at kind of the model legislation that we're talking about here today, I think there's a couple areas that I just wanted to highlight that I think would be kind of particularly helpful in this space. I think the first is that focus on a forward-looking planning process. And Commissioner, it's so great to hear that Michigan is, looping in electrification as part of your distribution system planning, that it's a called out and specific element. I know the legislation talks about, a separate process. I'm not really sure that's necessary, but I do think having it be a piece of that forward-looking planning is really critical. There are a number of utilities across the country that continue to use historic test years and backward-looking metrics for rate setting and for investment purposes. And I think given the pace of load growth that we are seeing, Phil mentioned it's not just electric transportation, it is data centers and a number of other areas. And as we look to electrify more parts of the economy, it's going to go even faster. So given this pace of change, I think the need for forward or future planning scenarios that take this into account, whether it's by reasonable estimates of projected growth, or other data sets. I know we just heard Michael Barabee talk about that. What kind of data can we get into the system and into commissions to really be able to be confident in those investments? We're shifting away from a used and useful standard, I think, and I think we need to. That was fine in a period of flat and declining load growth. That's just not where we are these days. So policies that support things like make-ready investments and broader upgrades to the electric grid that will support fleet electrification and just broader electrification, I think are critically important. On the kind of topic of utility investment, Ford has supported utility investment and utility ownership of EV charging infrastructure in various parts around the country. We're really looking to where the market is not moving fast enough. And there are areas that are simply going to be underserved for one reason or another. Examples that I would point out are multifamily homes or workplaces. These are areas where utilities could have a really meaningful impact, and we really look forward to the partnerships with them and getting charging in these spaces. As I mentioned, and I'll just wrap up at kind of the top of my remarks, we are on track to roll off more than 500,000 EVs annually next year. And that's just us. That's just Ford. So if you take anything away today from what I've said, I hope it's that the EV show is coming to a theater near you, and it's coming soon. So let's make sure we've got the infrastructure in place to support it. So really looking forward to the questions in this discussion. Thank you so much, Commissioner, and thank you to the NEVC group for having me speak today.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, lots to follow up on during the questions there. But first, I would like to hear from our final panelist, Roman Partida Lopez. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner, for this opportunity to join you all today. And Phil, thank you for your remarks there around equity as well. And I should note that, it shouldn't just be me, right, talking about equity. I appreciate you bringing that up and my fellow panelists here as well. But for others as well, right? I think equity is an issue that all of us should have front of mind, and ensuring that we are creating access for all. So with that, introduce myself. I'm Roman Partida Lopez. I'm the Senior Legal Counsel for Transportation Equity at the Greenlining Institute. And for those that are not familiar with the Greenlining Institute, we're a racial and economic equity advocacy organization fighting the lasting legacy of redlining and working towards a future where communities of color can build wealth, live in healthy places filled with economic opportunity, and are ready to meet the challenges posed by climate change. And today I will share with you why it's important to plan, do this forward planning that's been talked about, right? And develop plans that center equity and make equity real, so that we are able to develop equitable charging infrastructure policies that do provide direct and meaningful benefits to underserved communities. So as we think about the best way to meet, the top line principles that have been shared through NEVSI and from others that have been laid out today, especially when we think about how do we build stronger, healthier, more prosperous communities to increase and accelerate access to electric transportation options in historically underserved communities, we must work to identify the why. Why do we need to have this focus, and why do we need to ensure that low income, disadvantaged, underserved, frontline communities, whatever you want to call the community that has yet to receive or that continues to face barriers, we need to develop a process for that as well, right? Just as we have to forward plan for the grid and for all these other issues, we also have to plan to address the issues that are faced by our communities. And we need to do so through a bottom-up, community-driven approach so that we can address the barriers to access and to adoption that continue to reduce and limit the investments made in these communities. So what are some of those challenges that we continue to face? And Adam kind of touched on them already in his remarks, right? We have limited charging access at multifamily dwellings. For those that own single-family residential homes, those homes might need panel upgrades or other upgrades needed to see charging or solar or another type of renewable. We know we need more public charging, especially in underserved areas, to make it easier for those that don't own their home or cannot have charging installed in their place of residence. Yet we still know that it's 3 to 4 times more expensive to charge in public. And when it comes to deployment in underserved communities, that's more limited than in other communities. We also have limited alignment between where we see vehicle incentives being deployed or accessed and where we are seeing charging investments. There's also a need to develop a workforce that reflects the communities where these chargers are being installed and maintained. And let's also not forget the need to deploy charging to support trucks, buses, and port equipment, right? Which we know have major air quality implications for our frontline communities. So these are just some of the challenges that we have in front of us. These are not exhaustive, as you all know, but because there's a lot more that I can list and a lot more that our communities continue to face. However, with some of these challenges in mind, I think we must approach this work through an intersectional lens to ensure that so that we are addressing multiple issues at once. Because programs might be siloed, but problems are not. So utilities and other implementing agencies in the development of their plans, these policies, of their policies or programs, need to think through what a community-driven process looks like and must work to operationalize equity and develop this bottom-up community-driven process that delivers this direct and meaningful benefits to frontline and underserved communities. This means that when we talk about making equity real, equity must be showing up in the mission, vision, and values. It must show up in the process, in the implementation, and in the evaluation and analysis. And in order to develop this bottom-up community-driven approach, we must work to engage communities, which means hosting multiple meetings in the community to build trust, to demonstrate commitment to this process. And through this process, we can then determine what type of investments we should have utilities be making to maximize the limited ratepayer dollars that they have. So with the following 4 principles, I just kind of want to lay out, what this operationalizing equity might look like for you all. First, as I already mentioned, we must define what equity benefits and accompanying metrics and outcomes are. Agencies need to clearly state, what they mean with equity and who they're prioritizing in these investments. Equity cannot just be a buzzword. It must be a practice reflected in action that support and prioritize investments in our communities that have the biggest barriers and challenges. We also need to identify where charging is needed by outlining, where we continue to have charging deserts, what are the challenges that exist there, and work with community groups and other stakeholders to explore what charging deployment might look like and what type of benefits and co-benefits they want to see. Which brings me to the second principle. Benefits should serve people and not just places. It's easy, but yet counterproductive to disseminate funding and deploy infrastructure in census tracts that are classified as disadvantaged or frontline communities and leave it at that. If we are serious about making equity real and maximize the limited state resources, we must think more holistically and ensure that we're providing cleaner air, training, access to jobs, and other economic opportunities as we deploy this charging. Deployment of resources in a geographic region on its own is not enough. And with this in mind, we need agencies to help support and fill the gaps not covered by the private industry by being intentional and targeted with the use of state or ratepayer funds. Third, we must create opportunities for wealth building and facilitate access to the new green economy. So we must ensure a just economy, and we must reimagine the benefits of community infrastructure investments to include job opportunities, local hiring, and other benefits defined by community and other stakeholders. And lastly, climate and resiliency planning should prioritize people and not just property. I know climate adaptation and resiliency is top of mind right now, given the extreme weather conditions we've been faced with over the last few weeks and over the last few years now. So we need to plan ahead and be intentional and deploy more charging NEVs to be able to withstand and support communities' extreme weather conditions. So in closing, I want to leave you with the following. The Policy Link, along with Stanford Social Innovation Department and along with documented advocacy from our disabled community, talked about the curb cut effect. Curb cuts, as referred to sidewalks, sidewalk curb cuts, which are not a standard development, required advocacy to provide these indentations to allow for those in wheelchairs to access sidewalks. These curb cuts, in turn, have allowed for additional benefits from delivery workers, families with strollers, and others. So when we develop policies and programs designed to benefit our most vulnerable populations, we develop benefits for all. So until we approach this work in a similar fashion with intentionality, empathy, and commitment, we will not meet our goals, and we will only exacerbate inequities and unnecessary burdens for those we're supposed to be supporting first. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to the question and answer section.
Thanks, Ramon. Really appreciate those comments. I'd like to start our first question for Phil. From your viewpoint at EEI, you have a large cross section of utilities across the U.S. How could we create consistency across the managed EV charging programs and rates so that customers throughout the U.S. have access to very similar revenue streams and similar EV ownership motivations?
So that's a fantastic question, and the old lawyer's trick is to turn it around and say leaders at NARUC could but the answer is we need to provide, really in the way that we've done things, we've had it very easy in the utility business. We've had essentially, swaths of time, and not to get too technical, but that are peaks and incentivizing people and things like that. The bottom line is this. I think what we need to do is we need to have the system run, and this is the danger. For those of you who don't know, Commissioner Barrick is an engineer. So this is the danger of a lawyer telling an engineer how to run a system. But the ideal way to run this is a flat, right? If we can utilize things in a flat manner, then that means our asset allocation is high. And so the biggest thing that I think we need to do is we need to work with our customers to incentivize them to charge at the right time and or provide that service at the right time. I don't want to discount that that's coming as well. But the biggest way that I think that we can do this is through the help of some of the things that Adam talked about. We need some partnership we've got partners in the tech area, but we're going to need partners in our friends in the automotive industry, because while it may be good for the system and it might be good for myself, that customer has got a lot of other things going on. There's a lot of things that are happening. And so one of the things that I'm most excited about, working with my friends in the automotive side is the automobile is essentially a gigantic computer now. That's basically what's going on. And so they're going to put some things in there that I think are going to really help us. And as long as we can get that, what we call meter quality data, or that assurance that those things are going to happen, then actually what I'm excited about is, especially in electric vehicles, and this doesn't exist in other places, where the vehicle sits vacant or just it's not used about 90% of the time. So we can really manage that charging, but it's not going to be something that most people are actively going to do. I'm going to need help from Ford Motor Company and others to say, okay, you have this platform. How can we make it easy for customers? Can we just sign them up to our program, which essentially promises them this, and they don't have to do anything? Everything in the back end on the electric side is taken care of. All of the communications to the vehicle is taken care of on the back end. that, Commissioner, I think is one of the things that we're going to have to do. So if we can work together on that, that's going to allow commissions, I think, to put in rates that can be more flexible and more right now difficult to manage, but we're going to get a bigger and better uptake in those things because we've made it easy for the customer to participate. The customer sees it as something that just happens. Adam knows that he's optimizing the battery for his vehicle and his customer. We're optimizing the system for the grid. And that's going to be the key, I think, is I think we've got to start pushing this technology. And the last thing I'll say about that is, because you asked, okay, how can we get all these rates right? And one of the things that is a little bit difficult in this new area is that traditionally, utilities, and we do this sometimes in pilots, but we don't get rewarded for taking risks. It's just not the current model. I do think we need to work together, with people like Adam and his company who are used to taking some of these risks. We mollify the risk as much as we can, but we come together to the commission and say, look, we're going to try this out. And this is going to be different and it's going to be hard, but we're going to try this out because we think the benefits that are going to issue are going to be much greater. But we need the benefit of the doubt and we need your blessing to do it, because otherwise, we're not going to act. So I think that really, I know you were asking about tariffs and how can we get it all correct. I think that if we get the underlying technology together, that's going to drive more synergy around the states, because as you know, every state is different. Everybody has a little bit different way of doing it. But if we have sort of that standard way of working with customers, of telling data, of working with the automakers, that will drive, I think, a little bit more consistency across for those rates.
That's really helpful. Part of why I'm asking is because we do have so many policymakers and leaders that are paying attention to this conversation, more so than I think we ever have in the past. And I think it's a question that I spend a lot of time thinking about too, and our EV state working group spends a lot of time talking about. So definitely appreciate your perspective on this. And I hear you that we need to use the vehicle technology itself, get the underlying technology correct, and then support opportunities for taking smart risks. So very much appreciate that. Adam, I'd like to go to you next. First, if you have anything to respond to what Phil just had to say, but also in your opening comments, you mentioned a frustration with a 5 to 7 year timeline for charging infrastructure interconnection with utilities. How can utility plans and programs help ensure that infrastructure development timelines match those that you need?
Yeah, Commissioner, I will take just a second to hit on a couple points that Phil made, because I think they are really important. One being around the utilization of telematics on the vehicle. I mean, it's just such an incredible opportunity to save customers a tremendous amount of money, as opposed to installing a second meter and having that upfront cost. So if we're talking about broad adoption, and I liked a lot of the points that Phil made about making this automatic for the customers, making it easy for the customers. That's really what we're looking to do as well. And I think leveraging that technology that's there is a critical piece of that, and really to keep costs down and make these programs, pencil out in the end, not just for utilities, not just for Ford, but for our shared customers. Because at the end of the day, that's really what they are. They're electric company customers and they're Ford's customers that are looking to participate in this. To get to your direct question, though, around kind of aligning those timelines, I think there's, a lot of coordination that can be done. Phil talked about, partnerships with utilities, and I think there's a number of phenomenal examples that are out there already in that managed charging space. Duke launching a pilot with us and a few other OEMs for a monthly fee of $19.99 to charge your vehicle. Ramon touched on so many important issues in equity. Equity is critical to Ford's overall mission and to this transition. And I can't think of very many things that will help, low and middle income customers more than being able to pay less than $20 a month on their transportation costs. That's just, one of those phenomenal aspects of EVs that folks aren't talking about. But over in the fleet space, I think this is really important. Phil mentioned National Grid study. I think that's a phenomenal first step in identifying those areas where fleet depots could be placed and could be brought on the system quickly. And full disclosure, I did spend about 5 years of my career at National Grid. So I just felt like I needed to say that after I gave them kudos. But that type of forward thinking is areas that we haven't seen in the past. We haven't seen industry willing to share those gaps or those opportunities on their system to bring them along. I also think there's opportunities just to partner together. And I know you're going to hear from the great folks at EPRI, I think in the next panel, but they have a program that they're trying to put together to really try to bring this information together between utilities and OEMs, so we can, jointly bring it to commissions like yours, Commissioner Paratek, or maybe we can provide some more of that forward-looking data, some of that information about orders that are in the system. Obviously, being careful about customer data specifically on the residential side, but especially in that fleet business, where are we seeing fleet customers reaching out and really looking to accelerate adoption of EVs? And I think fleets are a critical part of this discussion that actually isn't getting enough play, especially in areas of the country where maybe we're seeing EV adoption lag. Fleets have the opportunity to put folks behind the wheel of an electric vehicle that maybe wouldn't have gone out and bought one otherwise. And I think there's really an aspect of that in communities across the country that are really going to help us, because I've met very few people that have gotten behind the wheel of an EV and then said, boy, I can't wait to drive my ICE vehicle again. They're phenomenal, both sets are, but there's just such an aspect of EVs that are fun and I think dynamic, and the technology is really come so far. So I think that was a long answer to your very short question, but I think there's a lot of great runway, and there's great organizations like Phil's and like EPRI that are helping us get there and, bring some of these folks together.
I want to move us along, Commissioner, but I can't help myself but ask Adam for, we're going to need your help, Adam, because we design things, as for 8760. It has to work all the time, full bore, right? We need your help and your information with your customers to say, okay, if you want 8760, it's going to take 5 years. If you're willing to live with something less, if you're willing to live with 10 hours less, 20 hours less, 50 hours less in the year, mostly during the peak, by the way, right? Not a shoulder. Is that good enough? And can that get you going? That's some of these things that, we have to start working on together, because this is a brave new world, and 8760 for everything is probably, perfect enemy of good. And you having that customer data can really help us out. Thank you for the indulgence, Commissioner. I couldn't let Adam have the last word.
No problem. I definitely want to highlight part of what Adam said, because it's a favorite topic for me as well, is just the need for increased communication. I tend to be very vocal about the need for better communication with people like you, Adam, at OEMs and other leaders in electric vehicles. And I like hearing that you also see the need for that and the value in this increased communication as well. Roman, I'd like to go to you next. In your opening statement, you mentioned that there is limited alignment between where the need is and where chargers are installed. Could you unpack that a bit? Like, why is that happening? And then, of course, how do we then fix that?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And I just wanted to touch on something real quick, and I know we're coming up on time, but partnerships. Just as y'all were talking about partnerships, community folks, community groups also want to be part of that partnership, right? I think wherever we can find alignment and move forward pilots or programs where we can bring everyone together, and do I think some of what Adam was saying, right? Like who wouldn't want to pay $20, right, a month for charging? And if we could do that in underserved communities first and really pilot it there and build that out, with the intentionality of focusing in on where we have the biggest barriers, then I think we have a great opportunity. But we need more tables like this, right? We need other folks to be joining these conversations, right? Beyond, these panels, but outside of this, how can we convene folks where we're all in the same space and are having these conversations to really develop those pilots? But when it comes to, where things are not aligning, right? Yes, I think what I was referring to is that we were not aligning where vehicle incentives are being prioritized or where vehicle incentives are being deployed and where the charging is needed. We know that for lower income households, right? Like we don't have, as the vehicle incentives are not going into our communities. And so we need to then pivot and ensure that those vehicle incentives Just like we now want to ensure that charging infrastructure is going into underserved communities, that those are also being targeted at those communities at the same time, so that we are addressing both issues at once. We know if we don't have the charging, our communities are not going to get into vehicles. So how are we ensuring that we are aligning vehicle incentive programs and investments where we want to see charging deployed, with the commitment to equity, with ensuring that, you know, the ones where we have these charging deserts or where we don't have that much deployment, where we're prioritizing there. Because I think for a long time, we've really focused on market transformation. And I know in other states, I know we're in California, I'm in California, it's a little bit different, but in other states, right, you know, we're still trying to build the market, right, and ensuring that folks being able to access these cars, or that, you know, autos are wanting to sell in those states. But we need to do so again through that lens that I talked about earlier, right? If we're looking at it through this curb cut effect and we're focusing in and trying to address the issues where we have the biggest barriers, we're going to create benefits for all. So I think that's the lens we got to approach this work with.
Thanks, Ramon. I think that's so important, making sure that we're aligning the incentives with the need. And just wanted to highlight the first thing that you said again, too, the need to include community groups and community voices in the partnerships that are actually making these important decisions. I think that's a really good takeaway from this. With that, I think we're at time for this panel. I wish we could keep going for another hour. I have so many more questions for you all. Big thanks to all three of you, Adam, Phil, Ramon. Really appreciated your comments, and you know, I'm really excited about the future given the discussion that we were able to have.
Yes, thank you all. Thank you, Commissioner, for leading this discussion. I will say my takeaway is I heard a great deal of passion, intention, and commitment from this group. Commissioner talked about staring down the future. Adam said it won't look a lot like the past. And Phil said we're in a brave new world. You all, you know, we're not in Kansas anymore, folks. I mean, there is a sense of urgency, a need for plans. And thank you, Ramon. Accessibility must be a core value. Thank you for providing the specifics, the principles that we need to keep in mind as we put these plans in this future together. So thank you all for everything and your participation today. Let's see. Now I'm on to the next topic, our third pillar in our discussion today on rates designed for commercial charging. This session takes up the important topic of improving the business case for investing in charging infrastructure and increasing savings by requiring utilities to propose rates designed for EV charging that cut the bills potentially in half. We'll hear first from U.S. Senator John Hickenlooper as the author of the important provision that was passed in the IIJA, directing utilities and utility commissions to take up the challenge. Nancy Ryan will serve as the moderator for the session and set up the discussion Q&A. You know, I mentioned Nancy at the beginning as co-administrator of the National EV Charging Initiative. She is also a self-described energy nerd and served as the lead CPUC commissioner on the landmark decision in California on the role of the utility in EV charging. Today, she's joined by representatives of Walmart, the Zero Emission Transportation Association, and PG&E. Over to you, Nancy.
Thank you very much, Colleen. I think we're going to start by rolling the tape of of Senator Hickenlooper.
Hi, Senator John Hickenlooper here. Thanks for the opportunity to join your timely discussion on EV charging. Electrification is good for the climate. Electric technologies tend to be much more energy efficient, and they get electricity from carbon-free sources, a 1-2 punch for decarbonization. EVs are the most obvious example, and we've seen their adoption steadily growing. Nearly 9% of new vehicles purchased this year alone were EVs. But we've got to stay in front of that electric wave by making sure there's enough charging infrastructure to support all of those vehicles. Our bipartisan infrastructure law makes historic investment in public EV charging infrastructure. And our Inflation Reduction Act also delivers huge incentives for home chargers. But that's just the beginning. We need state policies to complement and to stretch federal EV charging investments even further. Public interest, industry, labor organizations like those in charge of the National EV Charging Initiative, they all need to work together to advance complementary state policies to speed up the installations. And it's not just about installing more charging stations. We're going to need to reduce the costs of operating charging infrastructure. To make that happen, we need to improve the economics of EV charging. Our Recharge Act, which was included in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, does just that. It requires state regulators to consider updates to outdated utility rates to better accommodate EV charging on the grid. However, Congress does not have direct authority over retail electric sales. We need complementary state policies to incentivize, or in some cases require, utilities to design and propose new rates that account for the unique attributes of EV charging. We don't need any subsidies for this. For public charging, we just need cost-based rates that are designed for EVs. Such rates will cut costs by almost half. And looking a step further, we need to encourage bidirectionality, or vehicle to grid, V2G, allowing energy to flow back from EVs back into the grid when energy is most needed. And that's why we introduced the bicameral Bidirectional Act, a new program to fund bidirectional school buses. It'll lower energy costs while helping clean technologies take off. It also requires utilities to look at rates that reward sending power back to the grid when it's really needed. Accelerating the adoption of EVs is like a team sport. Congress is playing its role, and we're all counting on your work to help reduce the operating costs of EV chargers and to expand the charging infrastructure. Thanks for having me, and especially thank you for all of your hard work.
Well, that was fantastic. We are really grateful that Senator Hickenlooper was able to join us today. And now we've got three great panelists who are going to talk about why getting this pillar right is so important. And we'll lead off with Matthew Nelson, who is the Director of Energy Policy at Walmart. So Matt, please unmute yourself and go ahead. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me today. It's an honor and a privilege to speak right after Senator Hickenlooper. As my comments will note, the bill he just mentioned is groundbreaking. A few years ago, Walmart CEO Doug McMillon set us on a journey to become a regenerative company that makes a positive difference for the planet and people. As part of that effort, in April, Walmart announced its intention to build charging stations at thousands of locations by 2030. 90% of Americans live within 10 miles of one of our 5,300 stores and clubs. And we plan to leverage more than 1 billion square feet of parking space to deploy charging that meets customer needs. Walmart's been planning this investment for months. And one of the key learnings of the planning exercise has been the importance of public policy and EV policy on the impact of where we will invest. In particular, commercial utility rates often determine whether a station is projected to be economically sustainable and able to operate as a sustainable investment, because commercial electric rates are the biggest variable that we see on operating costs when it comes to charging. Simply put, if commercial rates have not been designed for DC fast charging, have not been designed to meet DC fast charging's load profile in particular, station operating costs are often too high for the station to deliver affordable service to our customers and a return on the investment. That stands as a deterrent to private sector investment in charging in that utility territory, or in that market. In contrast, when a utility or a regulator has established EV-specific rates designed, commercial rates designed specifically for the load profile of public DC fast chargers, we see a completely different frequency in which that pencils to be an economically sound investment. To reach our national EV goals, America needs to attract investment to charging. The latest study from NREL that came out this summer puts the estimate at between $53 billion and $127 billion that we must invest as a nation in EV charging just between now and 2030 to reach our goals. Public investment is simply not at that scale. Private investment will be necessary to reach that objective. The good news is that commercial rate reform is underway, thanks in large part to the policymakers such as Senator Hickenlooper. As he mentioned, his Recharge Act requires all PUCs and public power utilities to evaluate EV-specific rates by actually a little later this year. In addition to that, state-level action with legislation that has passed in Massachusetts, New York, Colorado, Illinois have all recently produced EV-specific rates, and those rates are under development due to legislation that just passed in Louisiana. In other markets like Connecticut, for example, utility commissions have initiated this process and led to EV-specific rates without the explicit direction of the legislative body. And these EV-specific rates are attracting private investment. In other words, this public policy initiative is working. We simply have to reform the rates more quickly and in more utility territories than we are doing today. So thanks for giving me a chance to talk a little bit about rates and how they affect Walmart's investment. And I look forward to the discussion and the questions.
Thank you so much, Matt. Now we'll go to Lydia Krefta, who is with PG&E. Lydia is the Director of Clean Energy Transportation at Pacific Gas and Electric Company. Take it away, Lydia.
Thanks, Nancy. And I'll echo Matt's comments. I'm super excited to be here and to talk a little bit about the work that PG&E is doing when it comes to our EV strategy, and in particular, some EV-specific rates that we've launched within our service territory. So at PG&E, we have a goal to enable our grid to serve 3 million electric vehicles by 2030. We've got just over 500,000 vehicles connected to our grid today, and we want to enable at least 2 million of those 3 million EVs to participate in vehicle-to-grid integration applications. And we define that as anything from customers responding to passive price signals via time of use rates, all the way to active managed charging and bidirectional charging. And we're working on rates, pilot programs, and I say R&D kind of across all of the vehicle grid integration ecosystem. But today what I'm excited to talk to you guys a little bit about is our business EV rate, which is one particular rate that we offer that enables customers to charge at a lower cost, essentially, as compared to any other applicable commercial tariff, and also provides some of the passive price signals that encourage customers to charge during times when the energy is cleaner and cheaper. So our business EV rate is basically made up of two components. We have a subscription charge, which is kind of like a cell phone data plan. Basically, customers can choose a block of kilowatts to subscribe to in 10 kilowatt increments. We have two versions of the rate. We have our BEV1 and our BEV2. So you can choose anything in 10 kilowatt increments up to 100 kilowatts to be on our BEV1 rate, and then anything over 100 kilowatts, you can subscribe at our BEV2 rate. We also have a time of use component to the rate, and that time of use component has different prices for off-peak, on-peak, and a super off-peak. And that super off-peak is from 9 a.m. till 2 p.m. whenever we have the most renewable energy on our grid most of the time. And we designed this rate in consultation with EPRI, as well as by doing a bunch of customer research to really kind of understand. We wanted to think holistically how to shift away from demand charges and find a rate that would really work well for our EV customers. So we did a lot of research, a lot of discussions with customers, and this is really kind of what we landed on after we found that there were two key things that we needed to make sure we thought of when we developed this rate. One, that it was simple, easy for customers to understand, and would not provide too much cost volatility. And two, that it was economically beneficial. So we launched this rate in 2020. We have about 165 customers on the rate, and that covers almost 700 sites. And that's because we have a vast majority of the DC fast charging hubs in our service territory are on this rate. We also have a program that provides incentives for EV fleets, and the vast majority of customers in that program have enrolled in the business EV rate. So far we've seen it be pretty successful. On average, customers save about 40% when compared to the other applicable commercial tariff that they would be on. And in particular, this year with the increase in gas and diesel prices, there's quite a significant cost savings when compared to gas and diesel. Depending on your use case and the customer segment, it's typically on average around 50 to 60% when compared to the cost per gallon of gas or diesel. So that's pretty awesome savings that we're seeing for customers. We've also seen about 70% of the charging on off-peak times, either the off-peak or super off-peak times. So we are seeing customers responding to the time of use pricing. One of the things that we're really interested to launch in 2024 is we've got several dynamic rates. One dynamic rate that basically it's a real-time price based on the CAISO day-ahead pricing, and so it will provide a dynamic signal for generation costs, basically. And we're also going to launch a pilot that would provide customers compensation if they're able to install bidirectional charging and export back to the grid. We're also going to launch what we call our V2X rate, which is a little bit wilder. It'll include a dynamic distribution component as well as a dynamic generation component. And so we're really looking forward to seeing what types of customers enroll in these rates, seeing how we can continue to find new and novel ways to maximize the value for customers and for the grid with some of these different types of pricing structures.
Thank you very much, Lydia. Now we'll go to Albert Gore, who is the Executive Director of the Zero Emission Transportation Association, also known as ZETA. Please.
Thank you, Nancy. So my name is Albert Gore. I'm the Executive Director of ZETA. ZETA is an industry-backed coalition of over 60 member companies advocating for 100% electric vehicle sales. ZETA is committed to enacting policies that drive EV adoption and ensuring that those policies are optimized to create jobs, enhance U.S. competitiveness and security, and improve public health by reducing harmful pollution from tailpipe emissions. Our coalition spans the entire EV supply chain and includes EV OEMs, charging infrastructure manufacturers, and charging network operators, battery manufacturers and recyclers, electricity providers, and upstream mineral producers as well, among others, all oriented around the shared goal of 100% zero-emission vehicle sales on the shortest possible timeline. ZETA does not advocate on rate design, but we think it's critically important to discuss why equitable and sustainable infrastructure deployment is incredibly important for growing the EV industry and facilitating this transition to zero-emission transportation. And to understand that, we need to look at what has happened over the past 3 years, which I know has been the subject of great discussion today. But in this period of time, we've seen over $70 billion in private investment in the EV supply chain. EV sales have tripled and are on track to surpass 1 million vehicles this year for the first time. Just in the year since the passage of the IRA, 60% of publicly announced clean energy projects have been in the EV and battery manufacturing industry. Construction spending for manufacturing is up 147% since January 2020, and over 180,000 jobs have been created. Many states and utilities have stayed ahead of the curve to encourage deployment of EVs and to facilitate the rapid construction of charging infrastructure to meet that need. Lydia provided some great examples of what PG&E has done. The situation is not the same across all 50 states, and neither is EV deployment. That said, Zeta generally focuses on two critical questions, among several others, that are central to the national conversation about electric vehicles. One being, will there be enough charging infrastructure now, next year, and in particular as we get closer to 100% EV sales? And will the grid be able to handle all of the additional load? And our answer to both of these questions is emphatically yes, with a caveat, which is that we need alignment on a range of smart policies designed to meet this challenge, including around deployment and operation of charging infrastructure and recovery of costs to serve a new and rapidly growing segment. We're just starting to have a serious conversation about the full range of benefits that a shift from gas to electricity as a transportation fuel can provide. Spent a lot of time talking about the vehicles, and still do. We're able to really talk about the fuel itself and the full benefits there. Electricity is cheaper, cleaner, safer. It's made in the USA. It can be shared bidirectionally and turn vehicles into grid assets. And it's delivered across the country by an industry that already supports over 7 million jobs. For consumers, lower and more predictable fuel costs will accelerate EV adoption by further enhancing the total cost of ownership advantage of electric vehicles across all vehicle classes. An alignment on the questions that we're addressing here today will clarify and enhance all of these benefits and allow us to better communicate them to consumers and policymakers and all the various stakeholders. Consumer demand for EVs far exceeds even the most aggressive estimates from 10 years ago, and deployment is rapidly accelerating. So with answers to these questions, we expect to see more investment in the grid, more manufacturing of charging equipment, more electricity supplied through that equipment, and more EV customers on the road, ultimately. Driving vehicles with batteries primarily built here in the United States. And so this is a policy that has a real impact on electric vehicle and charger deployment today, and we welcome this conversation. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you all three for your testimony. I've got some questions for you, which, as Colleen noted, came from our audience members as they registered for today's event. So Lydia, I'm going to start with you. So Max, in his testimony right at the beginning of today's summit, talked about how EVs can be a beneficial load where essentially the rates that are paid in for charging exceed the cost of service. And I've seen and been involved in writing or developing several economic analyses, cost benefit analyses that make that point prospectively. The work that Max described also looks at it retrospectively, so actually based on data reported by PG&E and other utilities. So we know that we can do this. We know that we can actually save money for the general body of ratepayers through electrification, and that the benefits are greater if we give customers a range of options to incentivize them to charge in off-peak or even super off-peak periods. So that was kind of a long wind up, but Lydia, could you talk about, I think that, the residential segment is also critical and also targeted by the language that Senator Hickenlooper got inserted into the IIJA. So could you talk about your residential programs, the uptake and you're seeing and the impact that you're seeing?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's one of at PG&E, we say that we want to leverage EVs to decarbonize the economy at the lowest societal cost. And that very much is built on kind of that concept that by adding electric vehicle load to the grid, you can create downward pressure on rates for all customers. And so kind of lower the overall total cost of electricity or just total cost of energy, right? Especially as customers switch from gasoline to electric fuel. And then on top of that, we also are looking at how can we leverage EVs to both provide grid reliability and resiliency for our customers. And so that adds even another layer of value on top of kind of that downward pressure on rates. And so I think there's just a very large amount of value that we can kind of capture in this transition if we do it correctly, right? If we can encourage customers to charge during times that are low cost and high renewables, but then also share the value, right? Make sure that we're sharing the value that we're getting, that we're encouraging with that. So we have several residential programs. We have some programs focused on just incentivizing customers to adopt electric vehicles, incentivizing customers to install infrastructure. We have a pre-owned EV rebate program that we launched this year, and we've already seen about 4,000 rebates go out the door for that. And we also just launched a residential program that provides free chargers and a panel upgrade up to $2,000 for customers in low-income homes. And so kind of the way that we're thinking about that is how can we package together the like affordable cost of both the vehicle and the charger for all of our customers in our service territory. And then kind of on top of that, we have several other residential programs, but we also have what we call our EV2A rate, which is a residential rate for EV customers. And that can provide, if you're charging off peak, it can provide energy at about $2.20 per e-gallon. So compare that to, in California, the price of gas, I just saw it the other day, is about $6 per gallon. And so that's a pretty substantial savings that you can get in. So if you kind of package that all together, right, incentive for your vehicle, a free charger, and then energy at a cost of $2-ish per e-gallon, that starts to make a pretty affordable and kind of attractive package, I think, for a lot of our customers.
Great. Thank you so much. Matt, I want to turn to you now and ask you to kind of lay out for us, how can the kind of rate reforms that PG&E and other utilities who've been mindful of Senator Hickenlooper's language, how can those kinds of rate reforms help Walmart as it electrifies its fleet?
Well, the fleet is a big challenge. So big picture, Walmart has committed to being a zero emission company without using offsets by 2040. And as part of that, we've committed to moving our entire fleet to zero emission by 2040 as well. We're piloting a number of different technologies, including electrification, also some hydrogen technologies and other zero emission technologies for our heavy duty fleet. We have one of the largest fleets in the nation. And as a large fleet operator, we also are covered by the California Clean Fleets, Advanced Clean Fleets rules. So this is all of that is to say that this is a real world problem for us that we need to address. What we're seeing is the biggest challenge to fleet electrification is the timelines and cost of new service. We're seeing in some cases to get a depot electrified to serve the fleet that typically goes in and out of that depot, we're seeing lead times of 5 to 7 years commonly. That is completely incompatible with business planning, to not be able to make these investments and use them for 5 to 7 years. And we think that it's really essential that rate reform efforts, especially those addressing the new service elements of this, include heavy duty and medium duty needs. So for instance, pending on California Governor Newsom's desk is a legislation imposing more binding timelines on interconnection of new service requests to address the climate crisis. And we think prioritized on that list needs to be the new service investments necessary to serve these large fleets. These are the biggest challenges in California from an air quality perspective. Cleaning up the Southern California Air District doesn't really work without addressing the trucks that go in and out of the port complex, for instance, every day. And so these are the kind of things that from a public health perspective probably deserve some level of prioritization. So to answer, to kind of summarize the point, rate reform and it needs to include new service elements, and the new service elements need to be broadened from the current focus just on light duty to include the medium duty and heavy duty needs just from a cost allocation and a timelines perspective.
Great, thanks for bringing up the question of timely completion of service requests. That will actually be the focus of our final panel, and one of the things we'll talk, and we will be joined by California State Senator Josh Becker, who was the author of the legislation that Matt mentioned that's currently pending on Gavin Newsom's desk, Senate Bill 410. And I think also the first panel, the Make Ready tariff that was introduced in the first panel, is an example of a alternative utility financing mechanism to pay for deployment of infrastructure to complete those service requests, and aims to provide a more predictable formula for fleet operators and generally make it easier for them to electrify their fleets. So I think if you look at the package of complementary policies that we're discussing today, we're kind of hitting all of those points, and we'll wrap up with that fourth one. Albert Gore, let me go to you now. And you mentioned in your testimony that Zeta has a very diverse membership, that your members are really involved in many different aspects of what I like to call the EV ecosystem. We could also, borrow Senator Hickenlooper's analogy and say you've got a whole baseball team there. I think you've probably got all the positions covered, at least on the commercial front. So, can you give us a sense for some of the kind of different types of companies that Zeta represents, the kind of impact that rate reform could have on the business case for the kinds of investments that they're looking to make?
Sure. And I think, I'll start with consumers, I think, who ultimately, particularly when we're talking about fleet operators, but also in individual consumers, benefit from a predictable, lower cost fuel in electricity. So being able to model out a total cost of ownership years in advance will drive EV adoption. That in turn will pull forward everything within the EV supply chain, which touches companies across Zeta's full membership. But EV drivers and customers benefit from that relative to fluctuating costs, which you see with gasoline and diesel. EVSE manufacturers and charging companies benefit from a more robust and stable market in which to invest. And electricity providers benefit from new customers and finding ways to more flexibly deliver electricity into the grid and balance load. All the many benefits of more EVs on the grid that Lydia described way more eloquently than I can. And then on the battery side, what we've seen with a dramatic uptick in EV demand, which is sometimes a function of customers' awareness of charging infrastructure close to where they live, where they work. We see a very strong correlation there in uptake of electric vehicles, based on folks' understanding of how they're going to fuel their vehicle, how it's going to fit into their lives. So battery manufacturers, mineral producers, battery recyclers are all able to invest at a much greater scale with the expectation and understanding that there is a really rapidly growing market here for vehicles that's going to be supported by a similarly rapidly expanding charging infrastructure that is operated by a diverse and competitive marketplace and with predictable costs associated with it.
Great, thank you very much. Lydia, I'm going to come back to you now. I think, Colleen mentioned that I'm a self-described energy nerd, so I naturally gravitate to someone who can talk about dollars and cents and widgets. So that puts you squarely in my crosshairs today. So I want to pick up on a point that Phil Dion and made, and Adam Benchoff kind of followed up on in the preceding panel, which was about opportunities that we're really only beginning to exploit, to take advantage of the capabilities, the communications and intelligence and sensing capabilities built into virtually all contemporary vehicles, so which go by the name of telematics. And I know PG&E has been involved in at least a couple of pilots demonstrating the the power and capabilities of telematics. And it'd be great if you can describe those and talk about PG&E's vision for the future.
Yeah, happy to. And I think I can maybe tie it together, a nice point that Matt made earlier to weave it all together. So one of the things that Matt mentioned is that a lot of times if we're looking at fleet electrification, we're seeing some pretty substantial timelines. And that's usually because we have to do like a lot of these fleet depots are substantial. Like we just signed a contract to connect an 11 megawatt truck charging hub in the East Bay just a couple of months ago. And so a lot of times that requires some substantial upstream upgrades that can take a decent amount of time due to permitting, construction timelines, materials. So one of the things that we're seeing is that if you look at, let's say, DC fast charging hub that's going in, they might need 5 megawatts. If we look at I think somebody mentioned 8760 earlier, Phil maybe. If you look at the 8760, we can support 5 megawatts 98% of the time. But in August and September, a couple of hours per day around say like 5, 6 o'clock, we can only support 1 megawatt. Historically, from a utility perspective, we would say we need to do an upgrade. We need to upgrade so we can support 5 megawatts 100% of the time. But I think what we're really excited about and starting to try to test at PG&E is how do we, while we are doing that upgrade, how do we bridge the gap and enable these fleets, these DC fast charging providers to charge that 98% of the time at 5 megawatts and just kind of constrain on those couple of hours where there's distribution constraints. And so I think that's a really great opportunity to leverage telematics and the flexibility of vehicles. And so what we're doing is we're working on building out a distributed energy resource management system, basically like brains and communications from PG&E's end, so that we can identify these constraints, communicate these constraints to customers, and then leverage telematics or price signals to kind of manage around those constraints. I'll give a similar example, and this is like real things that we're seeing on our grid. We looked at a residential transformer, similar kind of concept. If you add an EV charger, it's going to overload it from 4 to 9, right? But if you actually are able to manage around that constraint, I think we found that you could get like an additional 10 to 12 commutes of charging, right? If you can just kind of like spread out that charging around the time that transformer is really constrained. And so we've been testing a lot of different approaches to kind of managing that charging, leveraging telematics and leveraging price signals to kind of figure out how we can get the most charging in at given the constraints that we have today, while also kind of simultaneously building for the future.
Great, thank you. Let's see, we've got just 3 minutes left, so I'm going to give you each a minute to kind of make any final comments that you would like to make, kind of answer any questions that I didn't ask you, or pick up on something that any of your fellow panelists said. Matt, let me go to you first.
Well, I'll just pick up on what Lydia just was speaking about, that the ability of charging, and she said this a couple times, so I really want to narrow in on this. The ability of charging to be a grid asset is incredibly unique and powerful. It is a flexible load. It can be turned off and on. It is smart. It responds to messaging, therefore. All of those things, whether it's done at the utility level, as she was just mentioning, or whether it's these are distributed energy resources allowed to participate in the wholesale markets through the ISOs as virtual power plants. There are a couple different ways it can be done, but it's critical that we recognize that as we as we seek a affordable but also a reliable and resilient grid, that there are very few assets as flexible and as much of a tool as charging can be in the right use case. That doesn't work in the Walmart parking lot at 3 p.m. if somebody is on a road trip. They need to be able to count on that charging, but it does work in many other use cases for charging.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, you know, the community of drivers is so diverse, and, you know, with a variety of options for a range of drivers and drivers' needs, you know, we can make this transition cost effectively. So great point, Matt. Albert Gore, any final remarks?
I'll just say, just consistently impressed by the entrepreneurial spirit among the charging providers, and the creativity that we see within the electricity provider folks who are developing new solutions. I mean, there's a serious benefit to knowing customers as well as electricity providers do, and that feedback loop, I think, has enabled solutions, created solutions that weren't foreseeable ahead of time in terms of how vehicles are going to fit into the grid and all of the range of benefits that can be unlocked. So I'm really excited to see where this conversation leads, but also what types of innovative solutions are created over the next several years as we see higher and higher rates of adoption.
Thank you. Lydia, any last words?
Yeah, so I'll just reiterate kind of the cost effectiveness point. So we've done some modeling looking out through 2030s, 2040s. And I think we believe that if we do this right, we can keep the total energy share of wallet for customers at or lower than inflation. And that includes pretty conservative estimates around time of use rates, around managed charging and bidirectional charging. So I think that if we can really innovate and accelerate in our ability to leverage EVs as flexible assets while also providing value to those who are driving and using those EVs, we could make this transition in a way that's really quite valuable and cost effective for folks. I think if we do it wrong, we're going to have to add more gas peaker plants. We're going to overbuild the grid, right? But there's a path here to doing it well and doing it right and doing it in a way that creates and provides value for everybody. So really excited about that future.
Well, I think that, you know, we have the brain trust together under the, you know, very big tent that we've built with the National EV Charging Initiative. And I think with, you know, folks like you three and, you know, our other panelists, past and present today, you know, as long as we keep rowing together, we can make these things happen. I will mention we're waiting for Senator Becker to join us to launch the next panel. So I'll take this opportunity to provide an infomercial for a paper that I co-wrote with Miles Muller, formerly of NRDC, now at Rivian, and a couple of other folks about rate design for commercial EVs, for EVs in commercial use. And in that paper, so that paper was published by the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, NARUC, last year, and it lays out some concepts and principles for commercial rate design for EVs, and also talks about the rate that PG&E has adopted, and also a relatively similar rate that was developed by San Diego Gas and Electric. So gives a couple of examples of different types of rates. Okay, I'm told that Senator Becker is here, so I want to thank all three of you for joining us today and for providing some really substantive commentary, and look forward to putting our shoulders to the wheel together to making these changes happen. Have a great rest of your day.
Well, thank you, Nancy. And as you said, thank you to this very informative panel that you hosted. And, you know, leave it to a U.S. Senator to remind us that EV policy is a team sport. So our next panel features a 9th inning home run in the last days of the California legislature. and a topic that's been mentioned in every panel up until this one. The topic is getting it built and energized. So we're going to be addressing the need to remove barriers to the energization of charging infrastructure and ensure the necessary grid equipment is built in time to meet our climate, air quality, and equity goals. Just last week, the California legislature passed SB 410. It was mentioned in our earlier panel by Matt, Powering Up Californians Act, and sent it to Governor Newsom for his signature. Well, we're so pleased to have today the author and legislative leader of that effort, Senator Josh Becker from California. He's a public policy innovator. That's almost a requirement in California, working at the nexus of community activism, technology, and social justice. He's authored several bills focusing on California's transition to 100% clean energy and net zero emissions. He's also taken on voter access and justice reform. I'm very pleased to say that he is joined by what I'm calling the thought leader who's who on this topic. And that includes Kim Okafor, representing Trillium and Love's Travel Stops, and Aravind Kailas, I think I got it right, Las Vegas. You told me Las Vegas, and I said, okay, Viva Las Vegas on the end of his last part of his pronunciation, a Volvo Group of North America. We are expecting Britta Gross of EPRI, but for whatever reason, she's not yet joined. But we're going to go forward because there's a very exciting topic. And the other thing I might add is that Senator Becker will set the table for the discussion and Nancy Ryan will moderate. So take it away, Senator. Congratulations on your recent win.
Thank you very much. And can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, I'm here at Climate Week. I found a hopefully quiet corner, although they are deconstructing this room. So hopefully we will not be interrupted, but I really wanted to be on here today, even though I've been running around New York for Climate Week. And to say that, again, to introduce myself, I'm representing Silicon Valley in the state Senate. And one of my top legislative priorities is to get to net zero, including how to build clean faster and take advantage of federal climate investments as well. This year I authored SB 410, the Powering Up Californians Act, which is the first in the nation revamping of distribution planning to ensure that we are preparing for an all-electric future, including accounting for workforce training and financing. I'm fortunate that in many districts, they're trying this, but my district is an early adopter of EVs and building electrification. In 2021, 50% of new sales of passenger vehicles were electric, and our local air quality district adopted a phase out of new purchases of gas, air, and water heaters in 2027. So since we had many climate warriors in our district, in addition to regional housing growth, our utility unfortunately under forecast the number of projects that would need to do in their 4-year general rate case. And they didn't have a great ability to necessarily lend intermediate funding from the private market either, coming out of bankruptcy. In 2021, they applied for a balancing account to our utilities commission to provide intermediate financing for these projects, but the judge rejected the application at the time. So as a result, the backlog grew to an extreme. EV chargers were taking about 70 weeks to be interconnected. 3 of our county's mental health facilities took more than half a year to be connected and cost taxpayers tens of millions of dollars in losses. Our local community choice aggregator, who had a pilot program to install heat pumps in low-income neighborhoods, avoided homes that needed upgrades because they would have to wait a year before they could begin installation. So again, I'll note this problem was very visible in our territory and PG&E territory, but other utilities in California are experiencing similar delays and some of the under forecasting and anticipating also needing a different financing mechanism. So this should really be a warning to other states and utilities, and hopefully now a model going forward about how we're doing this and solving it. So when I first came into legislature, I introduced a bill that would set reasonable timelines for utilities to interconnect projects with penalties for non-compliance. But since really what we found out along the way, the root cause was the lack of planning really for the workforce and the financial foresight for these projects. The main critique of this approach that I tried initially was brought to our attention by the IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, was that it wouldn't result in projects being completed. It would just be labor being squeezed in order to try to avoid penalties. So 2 years later, we partnered with lots of folks, including the IBEW, to come up with a more holistic approach that would really redesign the planning requirements for the utilities and the CPUC. So the bill required the PUC to set timelines and force utilities to create compliance plans, including workforce training planning and connecting to various regional growth plans for the better forecasting. In addition, we forced the PUC to open an interim rate-making mechanism for the utilities that had under forecasted these projects and required the PUC improve to prevent under forecasting in the next general rate case. So it's been a multi-level effort, as you know, but we did garner tremendous support from across the board for these efforts, everyone from NRDC and EDF and Sierra Club to a huge coalition of trucking groups that recognize the need to be able to comply with the state heavy-duty EV phase-out that begins in 2024, business and local groups, including the Chamber of Commerce, and many local governing groups. So these are groups that you don't always see coming together on environmental regulations. At the end of the day, the electricity grid is the backbone of our society. It provides access to movement, to livelihood, for food, everything. And when we fail to provide with timely interconnections, we risk a political backlash. And so we really felt that we had to have an approach that brought everyone together. And the approach we took in this bill, I think, can be a model. It holds our agencies and utilities accountable for preventing future extreme delays for grid interconnection projects. Overall, we need to revamp our historic planning process for utilities, probably nationwide, to meet our climate goals and to ensure we don't sacrifice quality of service while we transition. So that's a little bit of SB 410 and what we've gotten accomplished here in the last couple of weeks with a lot of help from a lot of people. So now I'm going to turn it over to our panelists and describe how they've encountered this problem and provide insights that they have regarding grid capacity. And then we'll stick around. Hopefully, if they don't kick me out, I'll be able to answer questions. Thank you.
Senator Becker, thank you so much for being with us today. And thank you also for your leadership on SB 410 and other bills. And I'm sure that there's more to come. I want to turn now to Arvind Kailas, who's with the Volvo Group, North America. And Arvind, I know that truck OEMs in general and Volvo Group in particular were, very active in supporting SB 410. So I think I'm sure in your testimony, you can kind of help us understand why this was so important and the difference it could make for Volvo and its customers to see this rolled out nationwide.
Thanks, Nancy. Am I coming through fine? Okay. Nancy, Colleen, Max, and NRDC and others, thanks for putting together this awesome program. And thank you so much for having Volvo Group on this panel. Senator Becker, thank you for your leadership on SB 410. Proud to support your bill. I think we need a lot of this going forward. Let me start out by introducing the Volvo Group then. The Volvo Group is committed to driving the transition to sustainable, safe, and more productive transport and infrastructure solutions while making the journey to become a net zero society. So that is very, very important for us. We offer medium duty and heavy duty trucks, transit and coach buses, construction equipment, power solutions for marine and industrial applications, financing and services, all for increasing our customers' uptime and productivity. We're a global company, as many of you know. Mother Volvo lives in Gothenburg in Sweden, and we have about 100,000 employees globally. In North America, our headquarters is in Greensboro in North Carolina. Now, why we care about this? Well, we have set ambitious targets ourselves. Again, sustainability is core to the Volvo Group, and we have a global target to achieve 35% of our product sales to be fully electric by 2030. This is a step along the way to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emission sales by 2040. And assuming a 10-year lifespan for our fleet, we will have a net zero rolling fleet by 2050. So those are our ambitions. We have proudly announced them. And the good news, they are in line with the Paris Agreement and really critical to remaining competitive in this rapidly evolving market sector. The good news, again, is we're already on our way globally. Let me just zoom into North America. And we're presently busy deploying Class 8 battery electric Volvo trucks, battery electric Mack refuse trucks, battery electric wheelers, excavators, diggers for urban and medium duty applications, and also battery electric terminal tractors and fire trucks in partnership with Tyco and Rosenbauer. So a whole host of applications where we see the potential for clean technology solutions, and we're doing that working with a variety of different stakeholders. However, based on, when you're doing a lot of deployments, you also have nice stories to tell. One of the biggest hurdles that we have encountered is the availability of charging infrastructure and also incentives. Let's focus on charging infrastructure. We're doing fine. We could be doing a whole lot better. But in order to scale and really meet our goals and for the industry to meet its goals, the entire analysis is predicated on a reliable and widely available electric charging, hydrogen fueling, or other renewable fuel infrastructure. We call this a third leg of the stool in decarbonizing the freight sector, in the industrial sector. While states like California, again, that's where California is showing the leadership, they have guaranteed two legs, the vehicle manufacturers and the fleets. There is really no requirement to adopt the third leg, which I call the charging and infrastructure. I think this is exactly the reason why we need bold policies like California's SB 410. Repeatedly, we are seeing in the market where our trucks are delivered within 6 to 8 months, but the infrastructure deployment takes a little bit longer. This is because of a variety of different reasons, but the main one being it's new for everybody. This is our first rodeo as this industry is evolving. And I think it's imperative for everybody to recognize that and have a seat at the table. And I think that's what a policy like SB 410 will enable. Of course, this is the starting point, right? And then actions such as the National EV Charging Initiative, your model bill and other things. And this white tent, Nancy, that you described, bringing everybody together to think about this and come up with creative solutions. I think that is definitely needed to secure the future of heavy-duty truck electrification. I think this would help get power to charging depots that are in sync with regulatory compliance timelines, state goals, and most importantly, we win together in the race to reduce transportation emissions. I will conclude by saying that, and I'm proud to say this as a Volvo Group employee, we're already taking steps here. We're engaging a diverse group of stakeholders, my colleagues and I. We're working with our industry competitors, entities in this vast and ever-expanding charging infrastructure ecosystem, government agencies, local, state, federal, utilities, very critical partners, friends, allies, not the problem, and a lot of thought leaders, the NGOs and others. It's really imperative that we start thinking about supporting bold policies and action to solve the charging infrastructure issues. And we at the Volvo Group are committed to realizing the smooth transition to ZEVs for the greater good of mankind. Thank you. Back to you, Nancy.
All right, Arvind, thank you. Kim Okafor, General Manager of Zero Emission Solutions at Trillium and Loves Travel. Let's turn to you now and hear about what legislation like SB 410 and issues with timely completion of service requests means for your companies, which are so critical to make it possible ultimately to electrify long distance, long haul trucking. But I think also to support the general public as they begin to take more and longer trips in EVs. So please, Kim, take it away.
Absolutely. I want to start by showing appreciation I really do appreciate being a part of this conversation and discussion. It's an extremely important discussion as we think through the sustainability and the sustainability journey for this country. So I just want to start by saying thank you for having me as a part of this conversation. Like Nancy said, my name is Kim Okafor. I'm the General Manager of Zero Emission Solutions for the Love's family of companies. At the head of that, we're talking about Love's Truck Stops and Travel Stops. Love's has about 645 truck stops across the country. We build a new truck stop about every other week. We build about 30 new truck stops, 30 to 40 new truck stops a year. And that's really our bread and butter. It's providing services to over-the-road customers, whether that be for medium and heavy duty fleets or for road trippers like everyone on this call. So making sure that we are providing whatever fuel our customers need is our main priority, our number one or top priority. Love's has almost 40,000 employees across the country. Our corporate office is in Oklahoma City. We also have an office where I'm at here in Houston, Texas. But the majority of our employees are in the stores across the country, providing the services that over-the-road customers need 24/7 in every aspect that we need it. So the Love's family of companies is made up of several different companies. Of course, the Love's is at the top, but you also have Trillium. Trillium is the alternative fueling member of the family of companies. We provide any fuel, any alternative fuel that's needed, starting with CNG and RNG. We also provide hydrogen fueling. We've designed and built and currently operate and maintain 3 hydrogen fueling stations for our transit customers in several parts of the country. We're also working on a 4th and a 5th hydrogen fueling station for customers. But Trillium is leading the way, or leading the EV build out for the Love's network. Our goal is to put in EV chargers for the light duty traveling public so that we can reduce range anxiety and make it so that you can make that road trip and you're not scared that you're going to be stranded somewhere out in the middle of nowhere. So that's one part of the company is Trillium. The other parts are Truck Care. We have Gemini. It's a fleet of heavy duty trucks that transport fuel and goods to our different truck stops across the country. We also have Musket. Musket is the fueling and logistics side of our company. And then we have a growing network of RV parks, truck washes. So we go up and down the value chain as much as it makes sense. Like I said, our main priority is providing goods and services to our customers over the road, no matter what that good or that service is. Everyone on this panel or during this discussion has highlighted how important policy is, how important that is for this market. We're really in the beginning stages, and how you get from startup phase to main stage to large scale to commercially available is through policy. Making sure that there's a business landscape for private companies like both Volvo and myself and Love's to make money. If in the beginning years, the economic landscape, the economic analysis for an investment that's new isn't the prettiest, but your goal is to make sure that it gets there. The issue is if it doesn't get there, that's when you see things start to fall off. So making sure that there's a competitive landscape, a business landscape, an ability to turn this business into a commercially viable business is the place that policy has for us today. We have several trade associations that assist us in doing that. On the EV charging side, our main one on the light duty side is Americans for Affordable Clean Energy. It's made up of a number of different organizations that look like Love's, that go across the country in several different states and look at policy and ensure that that policy is set up such that when we do put in chargers at our truck stops and travel locations, we have a way to make it make money, a way to make it make sense, and which is what it all comes down to. At the very end of the day, things will change over time. The fuel type will change, the goods, the needs of all of us will change over time. But the thing that won't change that much is the highways and byways of America. So that's what makes our positioning really important. Us growing on the highways and the byways, having real estate that's big enough to accommodate the energy transition, that's what's really important. And that's why backing up policy, being a part of the policy landscape in policies like what the senator has brought to the table here is really important. So I appreciate the opportunity to engage in this discussion, and I look forward to all the questions that you guys have.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Kim. Well, you hit the nail on the head when you said, these new businesses, whether it's Volvo Group, North America making the trucks, or Loves and Trillium deploying the refueling and charging infrastructure, these are businesses and they have to make money. Otherwise, we can't attract all this private capital that's necessary to lever up the biggest in a generation investment that the federal government is making. So, thank you both for, your role and the work that your companies are doing. But, we also need the policies, which we heard about from Senator Becker. And to make those policies effective for companies like yours, we've learned we need better data. And Britta Gross from EPRI is here to talk about the EVs to Scale initiative, which is intended to provide that data to, really facilitate the planning exercise to get the grid infrastructure deployed so that companies like Loves can deploy the chargers. So Britta, to you now.
Thank you, Nancy. Can you guys hear me just fine? I've had all kinds of technical complications in the last 15 minutes, of course.
It's working now.
Nancy, did you want me to share some slides of the data load forecasting maps that we're producing for the public? Adam talked about it. You just want me to talk through what the program is that we have and what we're doing to collaborate with everybody?
I think it's good enough to describe the program.
All right. So EPRI is known as the research arm of the utility industry, but we don't need bells and whistles research right now. When I joined EPRI about a year ago, stood back and said, what are the challenges in preparing the utility industry? And it's not those bells and whistles. It's really getting ready for commercial scale of EVs, cars, buses, and trucks. Guys have given today some examples of anecdotally what's happening when fleets go over to the utilities and say, hey, I've got a 2 megawatt or a 23 megawatt load. Gee, can't you get this done in 6 months or 8 months by the time the Volvo trucks are delivered? We have a problem. For 100 years, the utility industry has been designed with many, many regulated processes that tell you exactly and dictate how you build basically buildings and building loads, how you serve power to buildings. We are dealing with something very different here. So what we're doing at EPRI is stepping back and looking at the barriers to scale. A lot of these barriers have to do with the lead time it takes to get power to sites where charging needs to happen. It could be a depot, it could be public charging, and so on. And so to do that, the number one most important thing we can do, yes, we're going to streamline the process. Yes, we're going to work with regulators and flesh out the processes and the things that matter for transportation that are different than how you might address a building load and the time you have to address a building load. And that is to minimize the lead time. We have to get the information from the folks that are building these, that are creating these loads. We need that information years in advance, not months in advance. So we've begun a program at EPRI. We're giving ourselves 3 years to put all the building blocks in place. The program is called EVs to Scale 2030. It's about getting to scale by 2030 with new tools and processes. Much of this has to do, and Adam said it very well from Ford early on. Industry stakeholders have to meet each other in the middle, or we're not going to solve this problem. Fleet operators that know how many depots they've got in the United States, we need to know where those are. We need to know theoretically, what are those loads going to look like when everything is electrified, every car, every bus, every truck. Then we need to zoom into the near term. What is the deployment plan for fleet operators, for fueling providers like Loves, for the charging providers? What is the deployment plan this year, next year, and every year between now and 2030, and every year beyond till we get to the 100% case? Only by sharing this information, this data, will we be able to drive confidence into the utility sector and drive confidence into the regulator sector, because everyone's wondering, are the headlines real? there's no evidence of the data other than the headlines. And once, periodically, or as some of the fleet operators do launch and want to electrify certain depots, they are in fact knocking on the doors of utilities, but it's one utility at a time, and this is not going to get us to scale. So we've created this effort. One of the big things about the effort, I wish I could show you some maps right now, but look for these public release maps. It'll be an interactive national map of the United States that you can zoom into any feeder level in the United States. Look at Orlando, Baton Rouge, look at the rural parts of South Dakota, and you can look at a feeder level, which is exactly what the utility needs to plan on. You can look at what the loads are forecasted to be today and through the 100% case. It's really important that we look at this as an evolving and getting better every day with more and more data that comes in. I'm happy to say that all the heavy duty manufacturers have already provided all of their 100% data case to us. That includes Volvo trucks and Daimler trucks and PACCAR and Navistar. The Dealers Association is providing data to us, Amazon and so on. The list goes on and on. The data set will get richer and richer with real plans to electrify and where this goes in the long term, interactive maps that you can use to do your job, leverage this data, build on this data. I'm really looking forward to using this data as a platform for more and more analysis to move the needle both in the answers to questions we have about how we're going to get to scale, but also answer questions for regulators and policymakers and ratepayer advocates about the need to proactively invest today in these upgrades, because some of these upgrades do take 5 years, 7 years, and longer to build new substations, for example. So hopefully that's enough table setting for you guys to get a sense of what we're doing at EPRI right now.
No, that's great. And, Britta, you've been a stalwart supporter of transportation electrification for much of your career. And it's exciting to see, you take your skills to EPRI and play this critical leadership role. So let me go back to our leadoff leader, Senator Becker. And, as I'm sure you're aware, if not from listening to earlier parts of this section from conversations with Max Baumhefner and others, we intend to take the SB 410 show on the road next year and look to bring it to other states. And I think you talked about the broad support that SB 14 garnered here in California, but give us a sense, what advice do you have for us as we look to other states? How can we, replicate your success here?
Well, first of all, it makes me very happy. My team and Joe Gardius and everyone we spent a lot of many hours on this legislation. I will say a couple of things. It wasn't easy. Things had gotten to kind of a crisis point. So there was about 8 or 9 different bills on energization in the legislature this year. So partly it was kind of weeding through those all, figuring out what are the pieces that all make sense. And again, many of them didn't take our approach. They didn't kind of have that holistic, because I'd sort of gone the solo route before. They didn't sort of have the holistic strategy and holistic coalition that we had. So I think that was really important. And this may surprise some of you, but there's some distrust of our utilities in parts of society. So anything that seems like it might be giving them an advantage, it's interim rate making. Why do we need this? Why, are they going to abuse this? All of that was important to work through as well, and to be able to say, hey, here's why this is urgent. Here's why we need this. Here's why it's going to help everyone. These are 30-year pieces of equipment in many cases we need to buy. We're just trying to start amortizing that earlier, not raise rates overall. Just it's got to start now. Otherwise we're not going to be able to connect everything that we need to the grid to years later. So just explaining that is really important, and then having that broad coalition that hopefully we can help you take that coalition with the model bill nationally.
Thanks. And I guess one thing that's worth noting also about SB 410 is that it didn't apply uniquely to transportation electrification, but also to building electrification, which is, or for that matter, just interconnecting new buildings, which are clearly both priorities in California. And I note that just because that helped expand the size of the tent to get it passed. And worth noting in passing. So Arvind, I want to go back to you. And, one other piece. So, Volvo's providing the trucks. One other piece is actually the connector itself, the megawatt standard connector. Tell us what the, what the status is on that, and why, why that's such an important part of the picture.
Okay, I'm trying to unmute, and okay, I think I managed to do that finally. Yeah, no, for sure. I think, it's like an equation. There's one side is, how much the truck can take in, and on the other side, it's how much the charger puts out. And presently, our trucks charge at 250 kilowatts. It is not megawatts. A megawatt is 1,000 kilowatts, just for level setting purposes. I think everybody knows that. But the megawatt charger presently is not a commercially available product, if I can put it that way. Definitely not at scale. There's definitely tests that are being done, things that are being shown to work. But when you think about a real world deployment, and that too at a mass scale, it is just not there yet. And the technical challenges with putting large amounts of power in a short amount of time, or through a piece of equipment, is you end up heating. And so you then need to start thinking about safety considerations and other checks and balances that need to be there in order to make sure that this kind of technology will function in its intended purpose and not cause other issues. So I think the industry is working together to address a lot of these things. ISO is doing a lot of work. There's Sharon, SAE. So there's different pieces that are trying to figure out, okay, how the connector works and how should it be designed. Having said that, we definitely have the megawatt charging standard on our roadmap. I think we expect that in the second half of this decade, we will be putting it out. Maybe sooner than that. I already see some others that are actually testing out higher power charging. So that is definitely a pathway. I would almost say that you're not going to have CCS and then MCS. It would sort of be evolutionary. So it's going to move into higher and higher power charging, making sure that the charging connector and the trucks can work together in different kinds of environments, because you want to make sure that it's done the right way, it's standardized, and it's done in a safe manner. So I think that's kind of what I have to say about that. But the closing piece that I'll say is, while megawatt charging is definitely needed as a technical solution, a charging solution for certain types of applications, it is not the only solution that we need. So I would just kind of caution that it's going to be an assortment of different charging technology that will be needed, and it's very specific to the type of fleets, the duty cycles, and where you can actually bring in, a bank of megawatt chargers. You have to bring power to that location. So there's all kinds of considerations that need to be made, and also, making sure that the battery on the trucks, they're capable of actually charging at that rate. So a host of technical considerations, but I think the industry is kind of working on a lot of these things as we speak.
Thanks, Arvind. And I mean, you made such an important point there that, it's not just that trucks, medium duty trucks are different from heavy duty trucks, or different from light duty vehicles. But if you look at the whole medium and heavy duty, segment, I mean, there's just extraordinary diversity, both in the types of vehicles and the vocations that they have and the duty cycles. And there's really not a one size fits all solution, but there are certainly, there certainly is a segment that will grow over time, that will need that ultra fast charging to, keep goods moving rapidly, and keep the capital tied up in trucks productive. Britta, I had a question for you, but I think you have an answer already. So go ahead.
I mean, I was just going to add, I mean, Arvind pretty much just covered it, but I mean, one thing this industry that all of us love to do is we like to talk about the hardest problems possible to solve. And so we're zooming into, like, I don't know, 10 or 20% of the market problem. And the fact is that all those last mile trucks, all the return to depot trucks that do even up to 500 miles a day, they are easily charged overnight. We can even use L2 for a lot of these different trucks. So I always get worried that we're zooming into really the hardest part. Don't lose sight of the fact that we can probably electrify 80% of everything with technology we have today. And that should be our focus, because scale is really going to be the challenge, just getting this stuff on the road.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And, I think it's also worth noting just that, yeah, I mean, we just, we have that extraordinary diversity, and not everything needs really a big, expensive, complicated solution. Senator Becker, we started with you, and I want to go back to you to see if you have any final words for us.
No, just very excited. Again, coming literally out of session last week, kind of into this, the fact that people are excited about this as a model, is, sort of reward for our work, but, really did this just for our region because it was just a crisis situation. But I'm glad now that, people see this as something that we can take on the road. So happy to answer any questions. You all know how to reach me. But as this goes forward, let's stay in touch, because I need to hear as well from all of you, how is it working on the ground? And are we realizing what we set out to do?
Fantastic. Well, I know we could keep going for a while, but we're at time. So I'm going to thank all of you very much for your participation today, and for all of the things that you do every day to help further this revolution. And Colleen, back to you for final words and wrap up.
Yes, I agree, Nancy. This has been a very important discussion all the way from the, when we started until this important panel we just finished. Here's my closing remarks. I'm really going to pull from some of the discussion or some of the comments that were made. First, I want to thank all the policy leaders and panel participants, and thank this amazing audience for joining us today. David Turk said, this is a force to be reckoned with. And I say, yes. It's a determined group, he mentioned. You bet. The will and the way to make this happen. Amen. We have the right team for the job and have demonstrated shared and individual commitments to further the Biden administration goals. We have a plan to spread the word and take these greatest hits, as we're calling them, on the road. So this is, and I think everyone has agreed that the timing is right, the sense of urgency is present, and this is an important task. We need everyone, we need all of you, we need this broad coalition that the senator was able to bring to California, but we need to bring that everywhere. So please go to our website, evcharginginitiative.com, which will come up in a minute, to learn more about this campaign and how you can get involved. And thank you so much for your valuable time and spending it on this important topic. Cheers, and have a great rest of your day.